Afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for coming in person and by Zoom. The topic for today's town hall is the survey that's been prepared by the 6 trustees you will be hearing from today, including how they determined the ballpark figures for that survey. As your mayor until the beginning of April, I will continue to be engaged on this issue and endeavor to deliver on my commitment to transparency and full financial disclosure, which is in the interests of the village and what I consider my responsibility as your mayor. If the village decides to take on a preservation project that will no doubt be the greatest capital expenditure in our village's history, it is critical that this be undertaken with eyes wide open. Many of you know that there have been disagreements between the 6 members of the board and me and Deputy Mayor Chester on St. Paul's. The disagreements have been about process, the role of consultants, and transparency. I am most concerned about fulfilling my duty as mayor to make sure that you are an informed citizenry who have enough information to make the right decisions for the village. To that end, I have continued to ask Trustee Muldoon for the underlying documents to support his cost estimates. Regrettably, he has not provided any of them. If I receive them, as I've said before, I will share them with the public. Am I skeptical of the numbers? Yes, I am. But today we will hear more from the 6 trustees and from our treasurer and bond counsel. So thanks for coming, and I'll turn it over. Actually, just one more thing I'd say. It is my strong feeling that you've all given up an afternoon of your time on a Saturday, and if you have questions, that you should be able to deliver them verbally, stand up and be heard. I have mentioned that to the trustees. I will continue to say I think that's how it should be done. This is a huge issue. It's your money, and I think you should be heard. So I'll leave that, I believe, disagreed with.
I guess, thank you. So welcome, first of all, as the mayor said. I'm Judy Courtney, trustee with the village. And Eddie Finneran was scheduled to be here, as many of you probably knew. He unfortunately has a family situation he's dealing with, so will not be able to join us today. But he sends his regrets and apologies for that, and very understandable circumstances that he's dealing with. So just wanted to relay that message to you. If we could put up the presentation. Start me crazy. Great, thank you. So a few things I'll say before we get started in the formal presentation. One is, as the mayor said, about writing your questions on cards. We did that at the last meeting. In actuality, that was done even by the mayor at previous meetings. So it's just a process. We will read every question. I will read them verbatim. If anyone feels I didn't read your question exactly as you wrote it, you may come up here and give it to me again, and I will read it again. You have my word that nothing will be skipped. There's so much cynicism. It's really disheartening, but nothing will be skipped. Nothing will be editorialized. Nothing will be changed. Your questions will be read. We're doing it just to keep things organized, okay? Let me walk through the agenda and what we're going to talk about, and then we'll get into the actual presentation. If we can go to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. So most of this is the same for those of you who were at the first presentation as the first presentation, with the exception of a piece at the end. I'll tell you what that is in just a second. So we'll give you some context, right? We're going to get started and talk about how we got here, how we got to this point today, what was some of the background work, if you want to call it that, that was done by a lot of volunteer residents, by trustees, by previous boards, et cetera. So we'll spend a little bit of time on that. And then we'll get into the survey itself. I want to give you a sense and context about what the purpose of the survey is, what it is, and quite honestly, what it isn't, so people aren't misunderstanding the purpose of it. And then I will walk you through literally what it looks like, right? I'm going to go at a high level of screenshots of pages, which we did before. So again, it'll be a little bit repetitive, but for those of you who weren't here, I want you to see what it looks like so you understand the flow of the document of the survey itself. From there, we'll go in a little bit deeper into the content of the survey. So Trustee Muldoon will then talk through the options that are included in the survey, So the three options for that you can choose for what you want to do with the building. And then secondly, Trustee will go into how the ballpark figures were arrived at. So you'll get high level first from me, then you'll get a deeper level from Vinny about those two topics. That will then be followed by a presentation from Michelle, from Irene Wu, our treasurer, and our bond counsel about how bond numbers were arrived at, how those figures around village taxes were arrived at, et cetera. That's a bit of a new piece. We did that in a shortened fashion last time. We will have a lot more elaborate information on that this time, hopefully answering some of the questions that you have. And then we'll go from there. As I said, I would ask you to write down your questions. We will collect them, and then we'll do all the questions at the end. Obviously, we'll take questions from the Zoom and be able to answer those as well. Okay? So let's get started. So let's look at the next slide, right, and talk about what's happened so far. And some great work, right? Taking us back, so to speak, to October 23, there was an opinion poll that was done, designed by a previous board to really get a pulse of what residents were thinking and feeling. That poll had two options for residents to choose from. Option A was preservation with sub-choices in it. Option B was demolition. The numbers up there are what no commentary, Bob. The numbers up there were what the results showed, all right? It showed 61% choosing preservation, some or all of the building, with those options underneath, right? And then the second piece was demolition, which came in at 39%. From there, what happened was a mayor's committee was formed, and volunteer residents were given a task to do several different things, including things like looking at a community center, working with BCI, and a variety of other things that they were charged with looking at. We also hired BCI, which you probably heard of, as a recreation consultant who specializes in surveys and garnering resident input. So based on the survey, we then said the next step was let's bring in some experts who have been very helpful for us. And what we did with them was a couple of different things, right? They did a full needs assessment of our parks and recreation facilities. They did great work there, which they've shared with us, and we with residents about what the state of the union, so to speak, is on all the recreation facilities. They were at the pool, if some of you were there. They had a couple of engagement meetings at the casino for residents to come. So got a lot of great input into what, our current facilities are like, what do people think about our current offerings, and what would they like to see. Then they sent out the recreation survey, which gave us a sense of priorities from the resident about what kinds of programs would they like to see in the village. Not talking about where they should be, but what do you want, right? What kinds of programs are most important to you? So that was a great survey. Hopefully many of you in the room participated in it. We got information back on that from BCI, and then that drove a couple of different things. One is, and this was part of their charge, was to create a recreation master plan. Great document. We literally just got it maybe a week ago. So we will be sharing that with residents. I won't say when, within the next few weeks. We'll have to go over that with BCI, et cetera. But that was part of the survey, right? Based on all of our analysis, all of our assessment, all of what residents want, what should the plan be going forward for recreation and parks? Great work. The next step then related to the St. Paul's project was to say, now we know what residents are looking for in terms of programming, what might work if we thought that St. Paul's could be a community center. Residents tell us they want this, right? X, Y, and Z in terms of programs. We know what could work or not work in the building and what it might look like. And so let's try to marry the two and see whether that still works for residents. That's where this survey comes in. So you could see, I can't even see the light, right? So you could see as we get to the survey now for St. Paul's, what we did was we took all of that information that's been done, starting with the opinion poll, kind of working with BCI, taking that information, and then they created, and we have edited, so I don't want to say it's exactly what BCI created, we have edited this St. Paul's survey. There's been a lot of talk, I will say, about whether it's BCI survey or our survey. I have just some things to remember with that. The framework of the survey that all residents will receive is BCI's framework. the majority of the questions in there are BCIs, especially about programming, priorities for programming, etc. We had a different view than BCI about how the options should be presented. We did. We talked it through. We talked it through with them. We made a decision as a majority of the Board of Trustees to have some of what BCI suggested, but not all. So it was a difference of opinion. No qualms about that. And then we went through the financial piece, which we'll talk about in a minute. But BCI has helped us tremendously. They have just vetted the survey. They do some pre-testing to make sure the questions are understood, et cetera. We just got back the final version of that a couple of days ago. Still some tweaking to be done, and hopefully it'll be in residents' hands soon. And we'll go over a timeline in a little bit. But that's all the work that's been done so far. So what I wanted to do is then spend a few more minutes talking about, as I said, kind of at a high level, the document, the survey that everybody in this room's household will receive, so you're familiar with it. And then we'll do a deeper dive into what each of those segments mean. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, we can go, I covered this. We can go through, thanks. Okay, so the St. Paul survey, in a sense, has three segments, right? If you wanted to think about it at a high level, there's three purposes or buckets of information that we are gathering. The first is, what programs do you want in the building? We based that on the priorities that came back from the rec survey and said, residents are telling us these are the, and you'll see in the survey, right? These are the top, whatever it is, 8, 10 programs that they think are most important in the village. So then the next question is, do you want that narrowed down choice to be included as a possibility, right, in a St. Paul's Community Center? So that's the first piece. There is a section, I just like to point this out because sometimes this gets lost. The end of the survey, if you will, has a little bit of a separate section on resident appetite for an indoor pool and what that might look like. Okay, just as I said, just so you know that it's there, because that's an important piece that came back from resident feedback. The second thing is, right, so what's the programs that you're interested in? Then the second bucket, so to speak, is what is the physical structure, what to do with it. So the building itself, right? Programs A, building B. What do you want to do with it? Do you want to keep it as is and just fix the inside? Do you want to do something more elaborate? What does that mean to you? And what's your priorities? You will be asked, and you'll see, right? You'll be asked if you prefer any of those options, and then to prioritize what you want, or if you want none of those options. You have that ability to answer in that way as well. And then the third thing is, how much are you willing to spend? And again, we'll go into a little bit more detail in a second. But just think of the logic of it. Very simple. You know, people are getting like a little overwhelmed, and I apologize for that. This is simple. What programs do you think you would like to see in the building based on feedback we've already gotten from residents? What do you think we should do with the building physically? And then how much are you willing to spend? And then we'll marry those and see what we can do or can't do. Or if residents don't support it, we'll know that too. Okay, so let's take a quick look at kind of the document itself. Go ahead. Thank you. Right, so the program choices. And again, this is very similar to, it's actually the same, excuse me, as what people saw last week or 2 weeks ago, right? So the first thing, as we said, what kind of programs are you interested in? I'm losing. What kind of programs are you interested in, right? You will prioritize them. Just go through, thanks, Mayor. Go through, check them, top 3, prioritize, et cetera, right? Very simple, based on the recreation survey. So that's not the long list in recreation. Thank you so much. That is the list that we got in terms of priorities from you as residents. The next slide, or next page, then talks about some of the larger features that may or may not fit into the existing building or may go somewhere else. But again, this is based on resident feedback. You told us in the recreation survey, as we narrowed down that really long list, that these were your tops. So now we have to narrow it down again. So are you interested in these? Yes or no? And prioritize them as well. And then the next slide. Right? Then we talk about the building options. So programs, what are you interested in? B, what kind of building options are you most interested in? Right? We have 3 choices. Each choice also includes I will not support as an option. So you could just say no, no, no to everything. You could say yes, yes, yes to everything. And then you're also asked to prioritize. Once you complete that, sort of A, B, and C, is there one that you would support to a greater degree than another? Okay, go ahead. If you did select will not support, we ask you for why. We believe if you're not supporting this, which is certainly a choice that people can make, we want to understand why, right? Is it because you think we don't need the building? Is it because you think it's too much for the village? Is it too much money or something else? So we will tabulate, obviously, all of these results as well, but you have that opportunity to give us your feedback there. Then we get into, as we said, what are you willing to spend? Part 3, just as we spoke about, right? Part 3, again, more detail to come, but what we did was we broke down what the ballpark figures are, and then did extensive work with Irene Wu, our treasurer, bond counsel, et cetera, to say, if your home was worth X, whatever amount might be up there, right? In a general area, $1 million to $1.5 million, et cetera. So it's not your individual home, but you're in that category. Approximately, how much would your village taxes increase on an annual basis? Remember, these are ballparks to give us an indication of what you're willing to spend. And it may be none of the above, right? It may be none of the above, and you can certainly indicate that. Good, thank you. Okay, so that's the overview of the whole survey at a very high level, but we thought it was really important for you to understand the flow, sort of conceptually why we have it organized the way that we do, and the kind of information that we're looking for to gather from residents. I'm going to turn it over to Vinny now, who's going to talk through a little bit more detail on, first of all, the structures and what do you want to do with the building, and then where the ballpark figures came from. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming today. I know everybody's busy on the weekend, and it's great to see so many people here wanting to get informed, ask some great questions, and we will do everything we can to give you as much great information as we can. It's going to be straight up, it's going to be honest, and it's going to be transparent like we always do. It's pretty sad that I have to sit up here and have the mayor of our village basically accuse me of not being transparent or not doing the right thing when everybody in this village that knows who I am knows exactly what I am and my integrity. And it's pretty sad that I have to defend my reputation as a resident of this village, as a trustee, because if anybody is online, they can see all the stuff that's getting written. It's bad enough that I have to read that stuff online and on the paper. And I don't mind doing that because I signed up for it, and that's fine. But it's pretty sad that I have to come here this evening and get my integrity questioned by the mayor of our village. Pretty sad. Now, down to business. Number one, thanks again for everybody for coming here this afternoon, and I appreciate it, and so does the rest of the board. I want to give a big shout out to all the great committees that have been formed and have worked so hard over the years on St. Paul's. 32 years in, we're still in the same spot we were 32 years ago, unfortunately. But a lot of hard work has been put in, a lot of great volunteers and a great committee. A committee that hasn't been recognised in the last meeting that should have been was the great committee with the 38-person committee that was set up, I believe, by Mayor Cosmo at the time. They did some amazing work, just like the Mayor's recent committee who worked hard on community centres and getting us great information. Everybody deserves a big round of applause. and a big kudos for all the amazing amount of work they did for years and years to get us to where we are today. And I certainly appreciate it. I know all the rest of the trustees appreciate it, and I know you guys do too. So a big thank you to all those committees, and especially that 38-person committee who did so much great work. What makes Garden City what it is, and why are we here? We all love this village. I don't think there's any question about anybody in this room, their love for this village, which is amazing. It's an amazing village, and its history is what's a big part of this village. St. Paul's is a big part of what ties into this village, just like all our other historical gems in this village. The old apostle homes, the cathedral, the old hotel, you name it, the toll lodge that we just refurbished. It's the history. What makes us so special as a village? Our history makes us special. That really is the one, besides the amazing people that come to live here and raise their families here like we're all doing today. But the history, to me, is critical, and just about everybody I've talked to, loves the history of this village. It's something about the feel of this village that makes it so unique. And we have A.T. Stewart and his wonderful wife, Cornelia, to thank for that. St. Paul's, as most of us know, I think everybody knows by now, was built in memory of her husband. Cornelia had that commissioned and built in honor of her husband at the time. And it's on the U.S. National Register of Historical Places. And again, it's a big part of our village. And it just has to be taken into account as we're moving forward. Everybody's free to make whatever choice they want and tell us whatever they want to do with St. Paul's, and we respect it, and we will take it all into account. But the one thing we're going to do as a board is we're going to finally make a decision. It's not going to sit there with a fence around about it for the 32 years, not on my watch or not on the watch of the next board. Period. In the story. Something has to be done. What will be done is what the majority of the residents tell us they want to do. Our job will be to implement it, whatever it is. We don't know what that is yet, but we're going to find out some great information in the next upcoming months. And when we do, we will eventually get back to you guys and tell you exactly, here's the information we got, and here's the decision we think is in the best interest of the village long term. Not today, not tomorrow, long term. I've said it in the last meeting. One of the other things that makes Garden City great is the guy who founded this village. He had big thoughts, he had big dreams, he had big visions. And I think at times, we've lost that a little bit. It's time to get back to that and think, again, not for ourselves, not for today, not for tomorrow, but for the next generation, for our kids, for our grandkids, and every other generation that's going to move into this town when we're long gone. Let's leave it a better place than we got it. I think that's a part of our responsibility, and that's certainly a part of why I signed up to be a trustee in this village, is to make this village a better place with some other great people who do an amazing amount of volunteer work in this village, no matter what board you're on. So, just mentioning that there. Okay, so let's talk about the options we have in the survey just briefly, and then we'll go into ballparks and everything else. So if we look up on the screen to my left, it's a great screen. We have adaptive reuse as one of the options, okay? Second option, partial restoration. Third option, mothballing. And the fourth option, which I believe is still on line 8 unless somebody changed it, is, hey, you know what? I don't agree with any of the first three options. I won't support them. I don't think they're a good idea. We respect that 1,000%. Then you'll go over to line item number 8 and tell us, hey, this is what I'd like to see done with the building. Doesn't matter what it is. Everybody talked to a couple of people earlier just as I was walking in. They had some great ideas. Doesn't matter. There's no such thing as a bad idea, but eventually it will boil down to cost and what the majority of the residents are willing to support to find a project for once and for all that we can get behind and get done in this village, and not have it consume our lives for another 32 years. And that's not going to happen. So if we go through those four choices, first thing I want to talk about is ballparks. Why are there ballparks, and why are there some information when it comes to your tax increases in this survey at all? Initially, there wasn't going to be any of that. And everybody that I talked to and most of the board talked to said, Vinny, we can't give you any information if you don't tell us at least generally what this is going to cost us, these projects are going to cost. Generally, we know you can't give us exact numbers because we don't have exact programs or blueprints or anything like that. But you got to give us some kind of an idea what these options are going to cost us. right? In order for us to make a decision. Same way, how much approximately would our taxes go up if we chose one of those options? Just like I make the analogy all the time, it's a simple one. Would you ever advise one of your kids to buy a house when you didn't know how much it was going to cost, what the interest rate was, and how much construction cost? Would you ever tell your daughter, your son, yeah, go buy that house? You have no information, but go buy it anyway. We'll see how it works out. You can't answer questions unless you have at least some good information. You can't have all the information you want. We'd love to give you every little detail so you could make an exact, okay, this is exactly what I do based on exact information. We're not at that stage yet. This is a process, and we're at one of these stages right now. And the stage is a survey. Basically, what we want is good information back from you guys, and we're going to give you guys as much good information as we can. And it's honest, and it's transparent, and it's unbiased. And then you make up your mind what you want to do, and then we go with the majority of the village, and we go from there. So when it comes to ballparks, people have asked me, Vinny, why ballparks? Explain it to me a little bit. And what is a ballpark, right? So a ballpark is very simple. It's a number. I do it all the time because I'm in the construction business. People say, Vinny, I want to redo my kitchen. Is it going to be 20,000, 50,000, 100,000? Give me an idea of what it's going to cost so I can see if it's even within my budget. That's what ballparks are. They're an approximate cost, okay, based on the information you have. And then people have a general idea. It's not an exact cost, because in order to get exact cost, you need to develop blueprints and plans and everything else like that. And it goes through that process. A perfect analogy that I'm going to make, which I think it's at times, a lot of people look at St. Paul's, and because it's so big and like, wow, it's like, oh my God, where do you stop and start with a building that big? A lot of people get overwhelmed, and they can't even fathom, how this is all going to happen. So if you just simplify it and you go back to your own home and you buy beautiful old home in town, needs a lot of work, but this is all I can afford. One of the old Apostle homes, for instance. How does the process work if you were to compare it to your home versus what's going to happen and is happening at St. Paul's? So here's how it goes. Here are the basic steps, right? If you wanted to do a large renovation project in your home, what would you do? You would call a reputable contractor or an architect, and you'd have some discussion about ideas that you'd like to see in that project, right? St. Paul's, the home, no different, right? Then eventually, okay, you would talk to the contractor and you say, before I move forward and hire the architect, I need some idea of ballpark costs. Again, is this going to cost me 100,000, 200,000, 500,000? What's it going to cost me? Give me an idea based on square footages and your experience as a contractor in similar jobs. So you would get ballpark pricing. That's what's on the survey. What's the next step, right? Then the customer has got to go with his husband, just like the village is going to, and say, how much can we afford? You know what? How much money do we have in the bank? How much money do we make? How much money can we afford to do this project? The village is going to go through the same process right now. That's what it's going through. How much can we afford based on our debt? How much is it going to cost us? What's the best way to finance it? Okay. Once that's established, okay, it's in my budget. I think it's in my budget. Let's go ahead and hire an architect to now draw real blueprints and get us an exact set of plans. So now we can eventually put it out to bid and get exact numbers. But at this stage of the game, just like right now, I'm not committed to anything except for paying the architectural firm. That's it. The average architectural firm can range anywhere, in percentages. But the only thing you're committed to at that stage of the game is not going all in and doing the project. You're just committed to designing the blueprints and the plans, okay? Same thing is going to have to be done with St. Paul's one of these days, okay? Eventually. Next one is, okay, the customer and the contractor gets together, finalize the plans based on the programs that you want to see in the building, or whether you want 2 bathrooms, a kitchen, a family room, and you figure out what the best costs are, and you finalize the plan. And now once the plan is finalized, off we go, and we can send it out to 4 or 5 or 6 reputable contractors to make sure the job gets done right. So it comes back in with the most competitive price, but also the best quality. And then eventually you make a decision, okay, and you say, I'm going to hire the contractor. The budget is set, and we're good to go. A lot of times in construction, St. Paul's will be no different. The firehouse in Edgemere is no different. What'll happen? The plans come back. We're dreaming big. The final costs come in. It's more money than we want to spend. What do? Do we hire a cheap contractor and do a crappy job and get, a mediocre product? Or do we say, you know what, we're going to scale back the job a little bit to fit in that budget? Simple as that. That's how it works. You get the plans, it's more than we want to spend, we scale back the job a little bit. We want to make sure our infrastructure is the most important. Our infrastructure in any building is the most important. And St. Paul's is no different. You have to invest in infrastructure first, then all the fancy finishes and the beautiful finishes inside the building, away you go from there. Easy, right? And then once that budget is finally set, okay, and the bank says, I'm going to give you the loan, we hire the contractor. Now for real, we're committed at that point to going ahead and doing the project. So if you equate what you would do in your own home and what most of you guys have done over your lifetime in your house, and the younger people who are just beginning that process, it's exactly the same process we're going through right now at St. Paul's. We're at the survey point of this process. That's where we're at. Questions, options, ballparks, and eventually, if the village decides, the majority of the village decides they want to do a project, we go forward and we hire an architect and engineering firm, and we go from there. But we're still not committed to doing the project until one day this village, like we said the other night in the board meeting, okay, the village and the residents will have the final say on a vote to finance the project. Not the Board of Trustees, the residents will have that final say. And if the majority of the residents decide, yes, we want to move forward, we approve the funds, then our job is to go ahead and move forward and get the project done, whatever that project is. But it'll be driven by the residents, and they will have the final say in regards to the approval of funds. So I hope when it comes to ballparks and process, if you can picture it, now hopefully you'll have a clearer picture of what you would do in your own house, and how you would associate that to St. Paul's, okay? So we have a board right here to my right that some of you guys may have seen, some of you may not have seen. It's also on the village website. That is the majority of the people that I met and talked to in regards to establishing the ballparks for these different projects, okay? They're amazing companies, all of them. They're engineering firms, they're architects, they're contractors, they're suppliers, a lot of the village staff, you name it, a lot of great people on that board who basically charged us $0, you the residents, to be able to give us some guidelines and ballpark numbers. Remember, they're ballparks. They're not firm numbers. They're guidelines and they're ballparks. So that's, again, not all of them, but the majority of the people that have, some of those people also, by the way, some of the architectural firms and engineering firms have worked on St. Paul's and are very, very familiar with St. Paul's. Also, what we did was we looked at the best professional information that we have that's already been done at St. Paul's in regards to the all the engineering firms, architectural firms, and then the Westerman report, which was done, I believe, in fall or something in that time frame of 2023. Most of you guys have heard about or maybe very informed about the Westerman report. That was a company that was hired and paid for by the village to do a full analysis and give us options on different things within St. Paul's. So I basically used their report, which again was a very thorough and detailed report. Overall, I thought Westerman did a fantastic job in that report, but there were some gaps and some holes in their report in regards to costs in 2025 that gets us from their report to projects at St. Paul's. So basically what we did, we went out there, we talked to all these different firms, and we plugged any of those holes that we felt like were missing to make sure you guys have real costs. Because the approximate number for adaptive reuse from the Westerman report approximately was about $50 million, something in that range. The approximate estimate now that we've put on the ballpark number is approximately on the high side, $75 million, okay? So let's start with adaptive reuse and how do you get from 50 million to 75 million? And I've said it before at the last meeting, I'm going to say it again. I didn't go out and find some homeless person in the street and ask him his opinion as to what he thought this thing is going to cost. I talked to all those different professionals. A lot of them gave me estimates. Some of them did it verbally on the phone and went through it based on the reports I sent to them and the information I sent to them. Giuseppe is another guy, he deserves a huge shout out. Giuseppe heads up the building department. He was a tremendous help getting me information and working with me, and so was a lot of the other staff. Ralph and Irene obviously was a huge help on the financial side. So it was a true team effort. This is not the Vinnie Muldoon show. This is the Board of Trustees show, or the majority of the Board of Trustees that worked hard on this to provide you guys the information that you have today. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the ballparks and where we came up with them on adaptive reuse, and then we'll move forward to the other ones. Just to give you an idea, those are the three of the better reports that were done recently in St. Paul's. You have the Westerman report, which was one of the more recent reports that were done. And I said, overall, I thought they did a very, very good job. All of these firms did an excellent job. Thornton Tomasetti, really, really top shelf engineering firm. They did a great report back in June of 2021. Okay, some light reading there if you want to memorize it like I did for the last 4 or 5 months at no charge to the village. And then also Erwin Lobo Belinsky, another fantastic report. All just, again, very different looks at the building in regards to its structure and the options of what you can do with that building based on its condition. In my hand here on the right side are some of and I'll go through them in a little bit, the estimates I got from different professional qualified subcontractors, contractors, engineers, architects that are on that board. And this is the backup for the ballparks, okay? That myself, a lot of this board, and everybody on that board for the last 6 months, excuse my French, broke our ass to get this information, worked around the clock like I did at 5 o'clock this morning to prepare for this meeting, to give you guys good information. So when somebody says, oh, there's some shenanigans going on here, and to insinuate that, you can tell by the tone of my voice how much I appreciate that, because it's not just me, it's the board that worked hard on this, and it's every one of these firms who met us at the job site, spent hours talking to them for zero cost to you guys to help us, give us ballparks. And for anybody to insinuate, you know what, that we haven't done the right thing, you guys can make up your own mind. I'm not going to make it up for you. Okay, so off we go. So right here is, you won't be able to see it from there, is the pricing that Westerman worked up in regards to adaptive reuse, and we're going to start with that. So they were about 49,526,000, and then they had 2 other options for 5 million and for 7 million. Yeah, if you can put that right there, Bruce, that'd be a huge help. Sit it right here so I can see it and point to it.
The Zoom isn't working. I don't know if you want to pause. I don't know how many people are on Zoom, but we had an issue in connection.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, no problem. Yes, if you can put it here so I can. But when it comes to adaptive reuse, the finishes would be about 25,000 square feet. You can equate that to your house if you have a 3,000 square foot house or a 4,000 square foot house, or some people are lucky enough to have bigger homes. That's phase one, because we as a village cannot afford to finish that entire building. Everybody knows that. You know what? That's not something new. So again, the idea is to finish the 25,000 square feet, just like you would, and figure out the programs that you guys want in the building. And then the architects and the designers will design the programs, just like this room was designed, right? Oh, why is this room so big? Well, it was designed specifically for these kind of events, large events. There's so many different programs that can fit in St. Paul's, and there's no question about it. There are programs that cannot fit in St. Paul's the way it's constructed. What we also did as a part of the adaptive reuse was the company Body, Chris Body, the company that took out the lead glass windows and removed them from the chapel and are storing them. We have that in there if you look at it right here. Line item number 7 is basically to have them rebuild those beautiful, there's I believe there's 1 Tiffany and there's the 7 nave windows, something like that. But basically have them restore them. We got a price from them to restore them and put them back in. They're in one of those estimates that we talked about in here to build these ballpark figures is from that company and to reinstall them in the chapel. And then you can use the chapel. Obviously the chapel, chances are, will not be used as a chapel moving forward. But that room is spectacular, even in the condition it's in, and could be for a lot of different purposes based on what the residents want and the programs they'd like to see in there. So that's it when it comes to the chapel. We talked about that. What else are we talking about here? I'm going to take this actually. Okay, so if we go line item, okay, where do all these costs come from, right? So first thing you need to do is hire your architects, your engineers, and your soft costs, okay? I've talked to 3 or 4 of the different architectural firms and engineering firms that have worked in there already. And the general projections are ballparks, because again, we don't know what programs and how much work they have to do. Projecting about 3 million with a 10% contingency for a total of 3,300,000. Utilities, water, sewer, and gas. Okay, we're projecting about 990,000. Okay, for all of that, plus a 10% contingency to bring us up about 1,000,001. There's a perfect example. How did you get to those numbers, right? Those 2 numbers there. Okay, well, if I come right here and I take this piece of paper, and anybody who wants to come up after the meeting and look at these documents, you're welcome to do so. You know what I mean? And away we go from there, and I'll explain them to you one by one. Anybody who wants to come up, okay? So you can see this one here. You won't be able to see it from where you are, but it says on there, they label them soft costs at 3,550. Now, we cross-checked a couple of different things. Some of this work has already been done, and a lot of this is coming from BB&B, which is an architectural firm that the village have used, and Vacoda, and a combination of Thornton Tomasetti. All 3 firms have worked in the building. All right. The next one, just to give you an idea, 2, utilities, water and gas. Most of you guys can see sewer and water on that top. I worked with Stan from the water department and with Orchid, sewer and water. A lot of you guys probably know them because you've had your water line redone. By the way, if you have an old lead or an old galvanized line, just a reminder, change it, take care of it and get it out of there and put in a nice new copper line. So Orchid, sewer and water, very reputable firm, do a lot of the work around the village. I brought them in conjunction with Stan, tried to do some rough calculations what we would need for new sewers and new water. Their price was 990,000 right there. So that was their estimate, and that's where we came up with that number. Parking lots, landscape and irrigation, all that fun stuff, about 4.8, 480 for contingency, up to about 5.280 in regards to that cost there. So about 5,300,000 on that. Those numbers I got, and I worked in conjunction with Giuseppe. We talked to Pratt. Pratt does a lot of our work. Great family and great company, does a lot of our paving in town. And they gave us some rough ballparks in regards to, paving, lighting and parking lots. And we put in a budget for landscaping as well. And we came up with about $5+ million. There's flexibility there depending on obviously the details. It's just a ballpark, but that came from Giuseppe and Pratt giving us some good guidelines on that there. Okay. Abatement. So that's an easy one. We have a great report that we got from D&B, I believe it's D&B Engineers, in regards to that. I'm just going to pull that out quick for 2 seconds. So right there, this report, I believe it's online, right, Mary? Is it up on the website? From the abatement report. It is, right? Yes. It's the one from the village. It says the Village of Garden City on there. It should be, and it is up on the website, the village website. We hired a firm to do a complete detailed report on the building in regards to the abatement, and they came up with not an abatement number, a total number of about $10,770,000, which obviously it's a big number, but why is it a big number? The abatement itself, they projected about 5.2 million. About 3.4 million when it comes to ancillary costs, and stabilizing the structure, about 3.4 million for that, which is really the construction end and some other stuff. And then performance bonds, general allowance, another 2.1 million. And then a construction administrator to oversee the project, $800,000. So again, what we did was we've got 2 other just ballpark numbers. We sent their report to 2 other firms. It hasn't been bid out yet. That's going to be a process. Hopefully sometime early this summer, Giuseppe is going to put that out to bid for real. But we got 2 other comparable numbers just on the abatement, not on the other stuff. We got one number about 2.5 million to do the abatement, which again, in my view, wasn't complete. And we got another one for about 4 million. So if you average all of them out, it's going to fall somewhere in that ballpark. All right. So that's a big one there. Again, you're talking about the guts of $10 million for that. And that's your abatement and interior demo. Okay. Restoring the exterior of the building. All right. With scaffolding, metal staircases and railing. That's basically doing what I just talked about, the restoration of the exterior of the building, scaffolding the building. You do all your roofing, windows, you name it. So the exterior of the building is completely redone. Okay, that number there is based off, the majority of that number there is based off the Westerman report. Okay, I also checked with the architects who've worked in the building, and they gave me a very similar projection to restore the outside of that building. Okay, the inside of the building, we've talked about this 25,000 square feet, right? So how do you even estimate 25,000 square feet when you don't know the programs, you don't know the details, there is no blueprints? You base it on square footages, and that's what that's based off. Right there, it's based off $800 a square foot. For you who've done work in your home, you ask contractors how much a square foot approximately is going to cost me to build a new extension or do something like that. They'll be able to give you some ballparks as well. So Westerman had used numbers anywhere from 300, 500. I've talked to several people. They said 1,000, 700. So cross-referencing, $800 will get you great interior finishes in the building. And when I say finishes, that will include your ductwork, your plumbing, your electrical, everything associated with finishing interior spaces on a building of that caliber. And again, that can be modified. It can be $500 or $600. It certainly could be $900 or $1,000, but that'll depend on the finishes. But for ballpark purposes, $800 a square foot times 25,000 square feet gets you up around 22 million bucks. Stained glass chapel windows, rebuild them and reinstall them. If I go over here, I should be able to find them. That's it, number 7 right there. We got an estimate from Chris Body and his firm for about $594,000, just a little under $600,000, and that's where that number comes from. And they feel like that's a pretty firm number to them because they know what they're dealing with. It's one of the few things that actually they know what they're dealing with. New elevator for the building right there. We have in for $400,000. We've got estimates for $250,000. We've got projections from other people for $500,000, $400,000. You know, so we use the number of $400,000. for a high-end elevator that will go basement all the way to the top of the building, about 5 stories. That will cover that cost, and that's a pretty accurate cost. That will cover the cost, no problem. Fire sprinkler system. We got a couple of different estimates on that as well. There were some other numbers that the Westerman report had in there as well for approximately the same number. So anywhere from $1.2 million to $1.5 million, it's in there at about $1.485 million. Again, it's going to be right in that range to do an entire new fire sprinkler system that does the entire building. Even though we're only finishing 25,000 square feet, the rest of the building has to be brought up to code, both structurally, fire, you name it, electrical, stuff like that. It all, even though it's not finished, the rest of the spaces besides the 25,000, it still has to be protected against fire and everything else like that. It'll be unfinished space. It'll be semi-conditioned space, meaning that you will keep a regular temperature, close to a regular temperature of about 50 degrees. So you have no major issues with moisture in the future. And that part of the building can be reused, depending on the next generation of what they want to do. Geothermal and solar. Most people know what that is. Some people don't. Everybody knows what solar is, but a lot of people don't know what geothermal is. I actually have it in my own home. It's basically drilling pipes down. It's drilling wells on your property. You can do it either an open loop or a closed loop system of geothermal. But all you're doing is you're pumping up water from the aquifer and using that constant temperature at 55 degrees. You take the energy off it, and it helps you to heat and cool your home, boost it up. Average person likes their home at 70 degrees, something like that. Some people like it warmer, some people like it colder. But geothermal and solar system, we have in there, we've talked to 2 different firms. They're right here. They go right there. Brightcore Geothermal right there. Give us a bid to do both HVAC work and geothermal. They give us a bunch of different options. They are one of the leading geothermal companies around. They're fantastic. So they give us some good budget guidelines on that. And then who else? We have Empower, if I can find them. They're in here somewhere, mixed up a little bit, but they're in there. Empower is the other one of the big firms who does solar. So if you want to do solar in your home, Empower would be certainly one of those companies you would call. They're both excellent. They both met us at the job site. They both have good working relationship with Bob Cattell, who is heading up the St. Paul's advisory committee for us and is doing some amazing work. That entire committee, just like the other committees, are working hard and giving up an enormous amount of the time. And it will eventually, once we have all the results back from the survey, create a detailed report for the entire village and recommendations. But geothermal and solar, what does that do for us? That makes a huge difference. That's about 3.85 round numbers, $4 million. Why would you invest in geothermal and solar? Because it will run the building like at peanuts comparison if you were to pay regular National Grid and PSE&G for a building of that size. So basically you're making an investment up front to make it one of the more efficient buildings and the spaces that are finished and conditioned. There is another option. Empower gave us, and I said it at the last meeting, it was very interesting. They said, Vinny, if you have an extra 7 to 12 million handy, I said, I don't think that's going to happen. Well, he said, you should think about it and maybe find it. And I said, why? He said, if you put in this solar battery system, he says, you can sell back to the grid. And he says, your return on that is about $700,000 of revenue to the village every year. And that, he says, you can get a minimum of 20 years out of that. So do the math, 20 times 700. And he says, if energy costs go up, you'll get paid more. So you make the investment up front, and basically you're selling electric back to the grid, because St. Paul's has so many flat roofs. It's perfect to do solar panels on the flat roof structures at St. Paul's. So again, just another option, but very interesting option. But again, right now, they're options. They're ballparks. But they're all great ideas. But eventually, once again, if the residents decide they want to move forward with a project, that's when the architects and the professionals and the engineers will look at all these options, price them out separately. If they fit and it makes sense, then they get done. If they don't, then they get tabled. That's how it works. So hopefully now you have a good picture of adaptive reuse. You know what? The building is refurbished on the outside, beautiful parking lots. You walk in the door for the first time in St. Paul's, you're like, wow, looks great. And you have 25,000 square feet of building space to put in the programs that the majority of residents want. And you would prioritize those programs to fit in that 25,000 square feet. And somehow, if it ever came in under budget, which rarely, if ever that happens, you could do maybe 30,000 square feet, depending on value engineering, okay, which is another great term to use. I talked to Stephen Taylor the other day about that. He's a great architect that works with Vacoda. And we talked extensively for about 20 minutes about value engineering. What's value engineering? Value engineering is, perfect example is windows. So I got several prices for windows, right? And as you know from your own home, you can buy a residential window for $400 or $500. You can buy a Marvin window for $1,500, $1,800, right? Considerably different in price, but the quality represents that, and your thermal loss and everything else like that. You would go through that in every phase of St. Paul's and value engineer where to spend the money and where to save the money. But do it once, do it right, so we're not doing things twice. Very similar to what happened in this building, and we won't go into that today either because we'll be here for another week. So again, that's adaptive reuse. Okay, so hopefully you have a good understanding of that, and away we go from there. Partial replacement. Okay, what is that, and why is that? Oh my God, it's $90 million or 75 to 90 million. Okay, so it's very simply, it's adaptive reuse, but then it gives you, the residents, the option to decide, hey, do I want to add on to the back of St. Paul's and put a new 10,000 square foot building? Do I want to take down one of the wings and replace it with a new building? It gives you the option to take the next step. That's what partial replacement does. It puts it out there and it says, hey, you know what? We're going to go for gold. We're going to spend the 90 million and we are going to keep the majority of the building, but then we're going to take a part of the building, refurbish it, remove a wing, whatever it is that they want to do or the majority of the village wants to do, and put maybe a newer building on the back. Or there's another option. Again, and these are just options. That's all these are, right? Okay. A lot of people said to me, Vinny, we would love to have a beautiful tennis and pickleball facility, brand new one, the back of St. Paul's. I've heard that from numerous people. You could take that. Where is it? Right here. There's a separate line item. It's right over here. It is line item number 10 if you want to walk up here and see it afterwards or talk to me. Okay, 10,000 square feet. Okay, $1,200 a square foot, because a new high-end construction cost, you're going to be up around that number. Westerman said the same thing. I've talked to several other contractors in City and Long Island. They said, Vinny, that's the number to use. Okay, so we have about 13 million there to take the next step. Now you can do anything with that 13 million. You don't have to do anything. You could do a separate building. You could take down a wing. You could add on a new cool glass structure. Michelle has talked about that off the two ends. And, so you have all glass in the back of, say, the wings, and you're looking out in the back of St. Paul's from the cottages, because the cottages would be removed as a part of this process, just, the cottages would be removed. And then you decide, do you want to take the next step? And are you willing to spend more money to take that next step? That's what partial replacement is. It is adaptive reuse and taking the next step of adding an additional 10,000 square feet wherever you want, or based on what the residents want and what they decide. And eventually what the architects will design and draw and be like, wow, till you see it on a blueprint and do some lovely renderings, that could look amazing. But again, it's the next step, and you're adding approximately, because it's all the same line items except for the new construction right across here, which is an additional $13 million that you'll be taking on in debt. Okay, so in essence, that's partial replacement right there. Mothballing is the easiest one. What's mothballing? Okay, everybody, mothballing is a real term. People said to me, Vinny, why do you use the term mothballing? I says, because it's the right term. Look it up. Mothballing an old building. It says it right on there. Okay, basically what you're doing is you're preserving the building with the ability to use it in the future. Stop all the deterioration, tends to be in an older building, and have it so some other generation can use it in the future. It's a valuable asset. You know what I mean? It's for a lot of different reasons, depending on how you feel about the building. But mothballing is basically the exterior. It's basically the exterior of adaptive reuse. So you would still restore the entire exterior of the building, scaffold the building. You don't need all the big parking lots now, because you're not going to use the interior of the building because you're mothballing it for future use. But you are taking down the construction fence, restoring the entire exterior of the building, and then spending some money on landscaping and the roadways, reconfiguring them, new asphalt, so it's all clean. So if you drove by the building, you'd be like, wow, this looks amazing. But when you open the door, the building is still unfinished on the inside. Mothballing is designed specifically with old buildings for this purpose. It's done all the time. And again, fake news, here we go. It's not Muldoon mothballing, it's mothballing, okay? I love that term that's been thrown around, just like the people who like to slander people online and on the newspaper, which is always very nice for my first name, or my last name, sorry, Muldoon. It's been used. It's not Muldoon mothballing, it's mothballing, okay? And it's an option, and it's the cheapest option, okay? Besides, again, if we ever decided, or if it was ever decided that that building would go away, that's your cheapest option to do work in that building and not leave it there as a derelict building over the next 32 years. So mothballing one more time, restoring the outside of the building, still do all the stuff we talked about on the exterior of adaptive reuse with some landscaping and some asphalt around the grounds. So it's all cleaned up, looks great, and it's left for the next generation, because there's a big difference between $40 million project, $75 million project, and a $90 million project. And the majority of people may decide, hey, you know what? We want to preserve the building, but we don't want to spend 75 million. Or the majority of the village might say, no, we want to preserve the building. We want to use it. You know, we want to make sure we get use out of it. And we're going all in, and we want to do something with the rear of the building and put on a new 10,000 square foot and reconfigure the back of the building. That would be your partial replacement. So those are the three main options that are on the survey right now. The other key one, I've said it again till I'm blue in the face, you can't have an option for everything. Because if I talk to everybody here this evening, I guarantee you everybody has a different idea. Vinny, why can't we do this? Why can't we do another hockey rink? Why can't we do a big bubble on the back of the building? Why can't we do this? Well, you can do anything, okay? But you can't have 700 options. But what you can do is we can go to line item number 8, and I can say, hey, you know what? I want to take the 2 wings down. I want to just have the building smaller. I don't want to finish the whole building. You know, I want demo. Whatever you want, put it on line item number 8. Whatever you would like to see done in that building, we're going to see that. We're going to get all that information back. We're going to all take it into account, and then we'll go from there. But everybody has an option. If they don't like either of these 3 options, which I know, George, you mightn't be a big fan because we've talked about it. But you know what? But that's great. Listen, everybody's entitled to their opinion, and it should be respected. We can all disagree, but do it respectfully, right? I was fortunate enough to have lunch with George Salem, and we disagree on 99.9% of stuff. But I still respect him as a resident who's been here forever, and I think he respects me as well. And that's the way it should be. It shouldn't be this like, oh, there's some conspiracy, or you're terrible, or calling you names. No, you just should say, I have a better idea than you. Let's have a good disagreement, an argument about it, and then leave and go have a beer. I say it all the time. You know what? And it shouldn't be this nasty divisive stuff both online, on the newspapers, or in this room tonight. Anybody can walk up to me after, and I'll stay here for as long as you want, or the rest of the trustees will as well. And again, we can agree to disagree, but do it respectfully. Do it respectfully, because it really is terrible what's going on. Like I said, after the meeting and we answer all your questions, again, I'll have all this documentation here for you guys and go through. You can look at it yourselves, and I can explain it in more detail as well. And away we go from there. Okay, let me just see what else I have there that's of relevance here. I don't want to take up too much of your time because I want to get on to the finance guys. I was trying to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Sorry? Well, John, let me finish first. We'll take questions. No, we'll do, you know me, I'll take as many questions you want, but let me finish this presentation first, and then I'll answer those questions many as you want. That's correct. So John, let me finish my presentation here first, and then we'll go from there. Okay, I think I'm done here, guys. I just want to finish up, make sure I don't forget anything. Okay, yes. Always save the best for last. I almost forgot. That would have been a huge mistake. We talked about earlier. Okay, well, Vinny, that's great. How did you get from adaptive reuse with Westerman in 2023, which was 2 years ago, and they did their adaptive reuse, and they had actually more square footage, how did you get, say, worst case scenario, to 75 million and they were at 50? So here you go. And this will be brief, this will be easy, okay? We added in, we found, we'll call it the holes. We found 10 holes in their report, and we just filled those holes. Nothing got to do with them, just different things that were left out of the report for some reason or missed, and we went back, we verified them. We've spent the last 5 months doing this, so pretty much have it memorized by now. So, number one, they didn't have in architects and engineering fees. We put in 3.3 million for that, okay? New utilities, water, service, and gas, we put in 1.1 million. They actually had a number of $50,000 in just for a new waste main or water main. All new windows. We put in all new windows for the building, and we added $3 million for that. Westerman actually did have that option. It wasn't in the one I had, but they did suggest, again, putting in all new windows. We added $3 million for that. The abatement cost was the big one. They had in between interior demo and abatement, they had a certain number in there that was a lot lower, substantially lower. We put in an additional $3 million for that to make sure we were covered when it comes to the abatement cost of the building. They had nothing in there for geothermal and solar. We put in, and you can see it on here, $3.8 million for that, because it's a great investment up front to save us millions of dollars of operating and maintenance costs in regards to the energy bills in that building. Elevator, when I looked at their elevator and what they had projected and how many floors, I felt like they were low on that. We added $100,000 to that, not a lot of money. There was nothing in there for the restoration of the Minton tile. It's a lot of work to restore this Minton tile. It's spectacular, but it's a lot of work to restore it and to basically strip it and then reseal the tile. It's a huge amount of it in the building. It's spectacular. We put in for $300,000 for that. Painting price based on multiple opinions I got, including my own, but I talked to several commercial large painting firms. Okay, they felt like that number was low as well. We put in an additional $200,000 for that. They had nothing in their initial projection for parking lots, drainage, and landscaping. We put in obviously $5.3 million for that. They had nothing in there for that. And then when it comes to inflation and escalation, it's 2 years down the road. We added 6% in on that for another $3 million. So those 10 items combined added up to $23 million of what we call holes in that initial report and estimate. So if you add the 50 million and 23 million, but even with Irish math, I believe is 73 million, and we have a projection of 75 at the high point, okay? And that's why you try to always use, you have ranges, but I'm always erring on the high point of those ranges. We know what's going on with cost of materials, and now with tariffs and stuff like that, that's probably not going to help either, but hopefully that's short term. So that's how we got from the $50 million. If you look at the Westerman report, say, Vinny, how could it be 50 million and you guys are up to 75? Those 10 items on this list equal $23 million. And we want to make sure, people have said, oh, Vinny, the numbers are too low. I'm like, hold on, where were you saying that when the Westerman report in 2023, we're $25 million higher for a little bit less square footage. No, we're the ones who are being thorough and honest and giving you it, whether you like it or not, okay, worst case scenario, and you can stick to that. The other thing people have said, oh, Vinny, there's no way you can guarantee, I've heard you saying, hey, you can stick to a budget. Yes, you can stick to a budget. If you hire the right firm, you do your due diligence up front, and then you value engineer. So hypothetically, when you demo the building and you find $4 million of additional structural issues that you didn't realize, then you value engineer the interior finishes and you save $4 million in those and you scale those back a little bit, and then you put the $4 million towards the infrastructure versus the finishes. That's how you do it. It can be done. It is done. I do it every day of the week, okay? That's how you do it. We have a 10% contingency. 10% contingency, we have, people say that all the time, oh, you should have more contingency. Well, sure, we could put 30% contingency, 40% contingency. It's based on ballparks until you get these final set of blueprints. And once you get the final set of blueprints, then you get real numbers. You pull them back down, exactly what we're going to do with the firehouse on Edgemere. We're going to get these plans out, we're going to get these bids, and then we're going to pull that number down where we feel like, and the village feels like that's a good investment, and that's it. That's how this works. It's not an exact science, and it's certainly at this stage not an exact science, but it gives you great, honest information based on a table full of professionals that give us all their time and effort for free, okay? those organizations right there with 5 or 6 months of my hard work and the majority of the board doing all this together with Irene and with the staff in the village. So I hope that helps. It's a lot of information to take in. It's honest, it's straight up, it's transparent, and anything you need, you have our emails. I'll meet with anybody, I'll talk to anybody, and we'll stay here as long as it takes to answer your questions, and away we go from there. So thank you so much, and thanks for coming.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Harrington, and I'm one of the trustees, and I am work in the finance committee with our treasurer, Irene Wu. So I'm going to be brief on this because I'm going to be bringing in the experts. We're going to have Irene, John, okay, we're going to have our treasurer, Irene Wu, come up in a little bit with our bond counsel, Hawkins Delafield, and our financial advisor, capital markets advisors. We felt as a board and with Irene and the team that it was really important to introduce the residents to our financial and our legal counsel. We count on them for everything. They're who we're working with to get the numbers. We are not making the numbers up or balancing the numbers to our advantage. We're trying to be extremely conservative and upfront with what we're doing. You're going to hear from Bob Smith on the different types of financing that the Village of Garden City can do. He's going to explain conduit financing or conservancy or whatever you want to do. We can talk about that because I think there's a lot of misperceptions or misconceptions about that. We're going to have our capital markets team talk to us about the financials. We did extremely conservative assumptions. We basically, in the muni market, which is what we would be doing, there's a AAA scale. Right now, we're a AAA village. And basically, there's a AAA scale that's a curve from like 1 year out to like 30 years. And there's a credit spread that goes over that, right, George? There's a credit spread. And depending on the quality of the rate you're rating as an issuer, there's a certain spread over that. So say you have a 15-year bond that's a AAA, that's a 3.30 yield. There's typically a AAA could be maybe 25 basis points above that. So about a 3.55. We put 100 basis points over it so that we could be really, really conservative when we ran our numbers. And when we looked at ourselves as possibly being a AA credit, because say if we do have to leverage, say you guys all really want to do a $90 million project, and if there's a risk that our credit rating goes from AAA to AA plus or AA, our credits, there's also a AA scale. And we took an extremely conservative estimate over that of like 130 basis points. So we're trying to put forth numbers that give us a lot of cushion. So they're at the high end of what you probably would see or experience. So I just want to make that really clear. These are not cheap numbers. These are very kind of expensive numbers for you. There's a lot of misperceptions and bad information that people are putting on social media, especially Facebook on the residents page. Some people are pretending like they're the experts and they really don't know. So that's why we have this team coming up so that you'll know what's what. Let me see what else. We're going to go through bond yields. We're going to go through our tax assessments. Irene's going to take you through everything, and then we'll take lots of questions. All right? Here you go, Irene. It's all your show.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes.
And I'm also going to say, which I forgot to mention, those who are on Zoom, if they have questions, put them in the chat and we'll get to them as well. Sorry.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Irene Wu, the village treasurer. I work very closely with our bond counsel, that's Bob Smith, and with Rich Totora and his team at Capital Markets Advisors. They're the fiscal advisor of the village. We work very closely together in all our issuance of bonds that we do throughout the year. And when I go to market to sell bonds and bands once a year. So they are the experts in their fields in the municipal world. So we're very happy that they decided to join us today. We're going to start off the presentation with Bob Smith. Then after that, I guess between Bob Smith and Rich Totora, they'll both talk about the financing options. And then I will conclude by talking a little bit in detail about the numbers that appear in the survey in terms of the potential tax increases to homeowners. So thank you very much. We'll start with Bob Smith.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here. My name is, as you heard, I'm Bob Smith. I'm a partner at Hawkins Delafield and Wood. I specialize in municipal bonds. The firm Hawkins Delafield, I guess we go back about 160 years or so now, and have been very prominent in the area of public finance through most of those years. So this is a practice that's near and dear to me and to my firm. Most of my partners work on different types of revenue bonds and general obligation bonds across the country, and some even internationally. What I specialize in is New York State local governments, just like the Village of Garden City. And we've served as bond counsel to the village for many decades. I have a few decades under my belt, and there's several decades before I arrived too. So we've always enjoyed a very long-term relationship with this village. And we've been here since '93 and before, when we first issued the legal opinion for the debt that was issued to acquire St. Paul's. One of the things that I've been asked to speak about today is the mechanisms and how the village issues and authorizes debt. What happens is stage one is adoption of a bond resolution. Local finance law is the law, the body of law that governs issuance of debt by local governments in New York. And the local finance law calls for adoption of a bond resolution. Simple resolution, it really states the purpose. You've probably seen them before. If you follow what's going on at village board meetings, it'll state the purpose, which in the normal course, it's roads, it's equipment, it's buildings, et cetera. Or it might be the acquisition of St. Paul's from years ago, or the construction of improvements at St. Paul's that's being considered now. It'll state that purpose. It'll state what's called the estimated maximum cost of the project, which is to be an estimate, and it is to be the maximum cost. There's a lot of other things in the resolution, but those are the two main things that are being determined. This is our project. This is what it costs. The third thing is the maximum period over which the debt may be repaid. That is determined by statute. And we've discussed in this room before and with the village that the local finance law draws distinctions between buildings that are made of entirely fire-resistant materials as opposed to wood. There's plenty of wood in St. Paul's structure, so therefore it's referred to as there are classes A, B, and C buildings in the law. A Class A building, frankly, gets a longer period of usefulness when debt is issued. This would be a Class B building because it has some wood construction inside. So that's one of the issues with the project, obviously, and it's been discussed for years. The fact that 15 years is a pretty short period of time to cram, whether it's 50 million, 75 million, or in any other amount into the debt service into that number of years. So let me tell you a little bit about the structure of how the resolutions get adopted. In general, it's a 2/3 vote is required of the board. There's an option, of course, and I know it's been discussed a lot. If the resolution is adopted, it is subject to what's referred to as a permissive referendum. That means that if residents bring a petition after seeing a publication, the board is responsible to publish a brief summary of the resolution stating when it was adopted and that it is subject to permissive referendum. At that point, there's a 30-day statutory period during which residents can bring in a petition signed by at least 20% of the total number of registered voters in the village. and demanding a vote. So that's why it's referred to as a permissive referendum. It's not necessarily going to referendum, but it may go to referendum if if that petition is received within 30 days with enough signatures on it. The other option that's available under local finance law is to make a determination that the resolution shall be subject to a mandatory referendum. That means skipping that step and not requiring a petition to come in, but the board making a determination that we are authorizing X number of dollars over Y number of years for the construction of improvements to St. Paul's. And we hereby, as a board, determine it shall be subject to a referendum to be held on a given date, which will all be spelled out, and notice would be given, et cetera, of that resolution. Those are the only real caveats on the resolution. It's pretty simple. There's not a particular form of petition to be received. The law just says that a petition shall come in, and the statute describes what it needs to say. Really, just it essentially has to say, refer to the resolution, the act that was taken by the board to adopt the resolution, and state objection to going ahead with it without a referendum. So the referendum would have to come relatively quickly. Generally, it doesn't have to be held right away, but it's usually 30 days, 60 days or so after it comes in that the actual vote would happen. So it's a yes or a no. That's the whole construct for issuing general obligation bonds. There are two major types of bonds that are issued by governments. General obligations are what they sound like. It's a general obligation of the issuer. So the issuer, being the village, would be pledging its faith and credit. That's what the state constitution requires, is a pledge of the faith and credit of the Village of Garden City to make payments. Including a constitutional mandate that, as you're probably familiar, mostly revenues come from property taxes. It doesn't have to be property taxes, but it would be pledge of whatever revenues are available to the village to pay debt service, including raising property taxes. I mention all this because there's of that distinction between general obligation and revenue bonds, and we'll get to revenue bonds in a moment. One other option that's been discussed over the years is special state legislation to get some relief from that 15-year period I mentioned. There's no real blueprint for that. I mean, people know a little bit about getting laws passed. This would be a law that would have to be passed in Albany. So it would be a matter of going to the appropriate representatives, usually the local ones, but it doesn't have to be, in the Assembly and the Senate, to carry a bill. Which could say anything you would like it to say. And what's been discussed is asking for a period of, let's say, 30 years. It could be 40, it could be 25, it could be anything else. As I said, no real blueprint. But the discussion has been centered around maybe getting a 30-year period, which would spread the debt service out over a longer period, make it more amenable to people's budgets, and frankly spread the cost. This is the real concept of issuing debt as a local government is that the benefit will be spread over the next generation or so that will benefit from the improvements to the building. So that's a possibility. We see special legislation for a lot of different reasons in different years. It would be unusual to have a law exactly like this one, but I think there are a lot of arguments to be made. Number one, preservation and history. Maybe there's a health and safety issue, and there's also the difficulty of paying back a very large amount of debt over a relatively short 15-year period. So the procedure would be to have someone carry the bill. It would go to, I think, the Senate Finance Committee and the local government in the Senate, a local governments committee in the Assembly is, I think, where they go. But that's decided by the leadership in each of those houses, and then voted upon and in need of a signature by the governor to make it law. So the process doesn't happen overnight, obviously. I can't really tell you how long it would take, but I was asked to discuss that because that is one of the issues that's been discussed at great length, I think, in the village. So those are kind of two options. Exists right now, 15-year general obligation debt. Option two would be 30-year general obligation debt, but needing special legislation from the state to do it. The third option is to do something outside the local finance law, which is a little more difficult to do and a lot more expensive to do. So the best type of debt that any government can ever issue is general obligation debt. It will carry the lowest interest rate. You'll hear a lot more of that from Rich Totoro of Capital Markets when he steps up in a few minutes. And I should point out as we go, I'm a legal advisor to the village. Richard is a financial advisor to the village. So we work together on this village and many others across the state, but that's kind of the line between the two things we do. I as bond counsel and Richard and his company, Capital Markets, as financial advisors. So how would you go about doing something outside the local finance law? Probably by establishing a separate entity, such as usually it's a local development corporation. There's a section in the not-for-profit corporations law in New York State, which authorizes a local government on its own motion, by its own vote, to establish a not-for-profit corporation for certain purposes. The use of local development corporations, or LDCs, has expanded a lot over the last 5 or 10 years. They were very unusual years ago, but we've come across a lot more. We have there's a lot more interest in them and more acceptability in financial markets to do an LDC financing. As I said, that would be outside local finance law, so there would not be a 15-year limit on the debt. It could be done at 30, it could be done at 40, it could be done over whatever number of years seems appropriate. And there's a lot of benefit to that in theory. The one problem with a local development corporation issue or anything outside of local finance law is that you don't have that pledge of faith and credit that I mentioned. So that's what a bank or an underwriter would value tremendously, is the New York State Constitution and statutes say that if Garden City issues, let's say, $50 million in debt, and pledges its faith and credit, then the banker knows you must raise enough taxes to pay that debt. It has to happen because the state constitution requires it. When you get outside local finance law, there would not be a pledge of faith and credit. It's referred to as subject to appropriation debt. So it would literally be subject to the board appropriating enough money to pay the debt service every year. That makes it less attractive, and the interest rates are therefore going to be higher in every case. The other issue with a local development court issuance is that without that pledge of faith and credit, the banker wants to know, well, where will the money come from? Very often what we normally see with a local development corporation is something is being built and it has some kind of a revenue stream attached to it. We've seen them recently on parking garages in cities upstate where they build a parking garage and there's revenue coming from daily parkers coming in, and that's what's pledged as a revenue. Very different from that pledge of faith and credit that I mentioned, which guarantees that taxes will be raised or other revenues will be raised to pay the debt. What if people don't come and park? What if something happens and it needs to be closed and we can't have parkers? Very often you think of the other analogies like a toll bridge. You create a bridge and then there's tolls coming in every day to pay debt service, and that's what's pledged. And nothing else is pledged. There's no general pledge from the village. So query in this case, what would the revenue stream be? If you were putting something in that was a revenue generating entity of some kind, and I know there've been plenty of proposals over the last 30 some years about putting something in there. I don't think the village is considering anything like that. But if it was a revenue generating entity, then you'd be pledging some kind of revenues. You have an agreement with someone to at least theoretically have revenues coming in to pay the debt service. And I point that out only because I think it would be difficult to do something outside local finance law, I believe. Now, bankers are creative. People in general are creative and come up with ideas. One of the things I've suggested to the village, speak to bankers who might give some kind of a proposal, is something kind of formal, something I think we would look at, Richard's firm would look at and say, well, this makes sense, or it doesn't make sense. It can be done, or it can't be done. But that's the kind of a caveat I wanted to give in terms of anything outside local finance law. Yes, you can make a special corporation to be the conduit issuer of debt, but you have to be conscious of where where that revenue is coming to pay debt. One of the things that could happen would be a guarantee from the village under the right circumstances, keeping in mind the constitution of the state also requires when the village issues debt, it must be for a village purpose. So recreation, things like that, anything you might be doing, or office operations, any village operations are certainly okay. But you could have, in theory, have that guarantee from the village, but then you come full circle and say, well, if the village is giving its guarantee, then why doesn't the village just go ahead and issue the general obligation debt? And then it's the one who's signing the bonds and agreeing to pay the debt service. So absent some kind of other revenue, I'm not sure there's a really good practical way that I know of right now to do something outside local finance law. Other than, and the more practical way to do it, I think, is to try to get that extended period and go for 30 years or whatever it may be. So that's what I had to say on permissive referendum, mandatory referendum, and those three general options in terms of how to issue debt. The rest of this presentation goes into more of the projections of debt service and the impact on a typical household and things like that, which I think we'll turn over to Richard for.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm fighting off a cold here, so I probably sound a little funky. First, kudos to Trustee Muldoon for a very thorough explanation of how you arrived at these ballpark numbers. When we do these presentations, and we do them rather often, what the public wants to know is, what am I getting for my money, and what is it going to cost me on the tax bill? So that's what I'm going to talk about this afternoon. First, let me just give you a little background. So our firm, Capital Markets Advisors, is headquartered here on Long Island. We represent about 350 public jurisdictions, primarily in New York State, including most of the biggest cities and counties, villages in the state. Our primary role as independent financial advisors is to make sure that our clients are very well informed in terms of market conditions, credit ratings, the different options they have to finance debt. So we're on the next slide. Okay, so when the village typically goes into the market, they sell their debt via competitive sale. And in a competitive sale, my firm would structure the issue. The bond issue would get you a credit rating. We would then market the issue for maybe a week to 10 days. And on a certain date, certain time, we'd open bids at my office. We'd summarize the bids. We'd share them with your treasurer. We'd make a recommendation as to whether we think the lowest bid is the correct bid and you should make the award. And 99.9 times out of 100, you're going to take whoever's willing to buy your debt at the lowest interest rate. That's who gets the award. The village is in a very enviable position in that you are indeed a AAA rated credit. That's the highest credit rating that you can get. There's three major credit rating entities, companies in the United States: Moody's Investors Service, Standard & Poor's, or S&P Global as they're called, and Fitch Ratings. Your rating with Moody's is AAA, which basically means you scored very high on the criteria to have the best credit rating possible. Your management team, your debt and other liabilities, your economic and demographic factors, and your finances. You scored very well on all of those things to get you the AAA. There's no bigger impact on your cost of capital when you go into the market to borrow money than what your credit rating is. So I was previously a banker. I was previously a bond attorney. Half of the people in my firm were previously bankers. So we have a very good idea of what the market's looking for when we sell debt. We had said earlier, in today's market, a AAA credit could probably, if you were selling today, you might sell 15-year bonds, maybe at an interest rate of maybe 3.25%, 3.5%, depending on market conditions. Interest rates change every day, and they change during the course of the day. But they usually don't change by more than 5 or 10 basis points at the most in a given day. When we talk about basis points, interest rates 100 basis points makes up 1%. So if we talk about a 5 basis point move, it's 1/20th of 1%. Again, in today's market, you could probably sell your 15-year debt at maybe around 3.25%. As Trustee Harrington said, when we build our models, we know we're not in the market today. We're probably in the market next year, depending on how this goes. So we have to build in a cushion to account for potential market movement between today and when you're actually going to sell the debt. And so we put in roughly 100 basis points or 1% cushion based on where the interest rates were when we ran this schedule. And we based this on numbers that we ran in January when we first looked at this, because I think that's all the data that you received in the materials that you've been looking at. So the pros of issuing general obligation bonds, and Bob talked about this. General obligation bonds, because they're deemed to be the most secure municipal securities, lowest interest rates, lowest cost of issuance, and lowest interest expense over the life of the issue. In this instance, there would be no special legislation for you to issue debt up to 15 years. That's what the local finance law assigns as the period of probable usefulness of these types of improvements. And you would control the timing of your debt issuance, when you issue, how you issue, et cetera. The cons of a 15-year issue or issuing general obligation bonds, again, as bond counsel said, is you are limited by the local finance law to how long you can issue the debt. And the limit is 15 years. Whether you're doing any one of those three programs, the mothballing, the adaptive, the partial replacement, you're limited to 15 years under local finance law if you're issuing your own general obligation debt competitively. If indeed you were to go and get legislation and extend the term of debt, then you could issue debt for perhaps 20 or 30 years. I think the goal would be to go for 30 years. So again, the other con of issuing general obligation debt, since you're limited to 15-year debt term, the impact is rather severe, and that's shown on that bottom right-hand corner. The tax increase, these are the numbers we were given for adaptive, would be for a $67.5 million project. At a home in the village valued between $1 million and $1.5 million, that's the market value, your annual impact would be approximately $1,048 on your village tax bill. It is not, the village tax bill, of course, is not, it's not your only tax bill, because you pay to the county, you pay to the town, etc. But your village tax bill for someone in with a home with a fair market value between $1 million and $1.5 million would see an impact of about $1,048. For the largest program, the partial replacement, where you'd be issuing $82.5 million, and I know these numbers have changed a little bit, and I'm sure they'll continue to change. The impact to a taxpayer, again, with a home value between $1 million and $1.5 million, would be $1,280 annually. It's important to note that once we sell these bonds, you're locked in. The numbers are locked in. They're not going to go up. They're not going to go down unless you refinance the debt sometime down the road, which is a real possibility. But so the nice thing about that, if you think about it, the impact to you of $1,280 today is a lot less 5 years from now, as that money's worth less with inflation, et cetera. But your costs will remain constant. The small project, the mothballing, the impact to a homeowner with a home value between $1 million and $1.5 million, they would see an annual tax increase of about $543. And again, these numbers are, we think, conservative and pretty accurate based on if indeed you issued those different dollar amounts as defined here, 67.5, 82.5, and 35, and based on the market conditions with the cushion that we put in, this is pretty close to what your impact's going to be. It's not going to be doubled or tripled unless interest rates go haywire and go up dramatically, which isn't expected under current market conditions. We go to that next slide. Excuse me. In the next scenario, 30-year bonds, which you could only do if you get the state legislation, since now you'd be paying the debt off over twice the time period, the impact to the taxpayer would be significantly lower on an annual basis, but the overall interest expense, of course, is going to be higher. It's just like if you or I went and got a home mortgage for 15 years, the interest rate typically is lower than a 30-year mortgage, and the interest that you pay over 15 years is going to be significantly less than if you pay it over 30 years. but the annual impact to you, because you're paying the debt off that much more quickly, is going to be a bit more extreme. So if you go to that little table in the corner, you see that under the $67.5 million issuance scenario, now your impact is $721 per year. Under the 82.5 million, it's 881, and under the 35 million for mothballing, it's 374. That would be your cost for over, every year over 30 years. And again, it's important to know that you don't legally have the authority to do that right now. You'd have to get special state legislation, which takes time. But if indeed you were able to get that legislation from the state, that would be generally what your impact is. Next slide, please. The next scenario is the interesting one. It's a little bit of a wild card scenario. We do these all the time, local development corp. We're working on an arena upstate New York, and the arena doesn't generate enough revenues to pay for debt service. So the county in which this arena is located is going to put a backstop on the debt. They're going to say, in the event that the revenues that are dedicated to pay this arena are insufficient to pay principal and interest on the bonds being issued, the county will backstop that debt. In that case, there's a specific revenue stream. That arena has a hotel motel tax that's collected in the county, and they get a little piece of it that could be dedicated for debt service on any bonds issued by the arena. Unfortunately, you don't have a dedicated revenue stream. So in order for the village to issue debt through a conduit, what they would do, as Bob said again, there'd probably be a local development corp created by the village, and that entity, the debt would be issued through the local development corp. The village would then backstop it, provide some kind of guarantee either on total principal interest. It would have to be on total principal and interest because there's no revenue stream here. But because that credit structure isn't as secure as real property taxes paying principal and interest, people who live in, their home is their primary residence, it's their investment. Their business is probably the second biggest investment. They pay their property tax. That's why general obligation bonds are so secure. In this case, it would be the entity, the structure would probably be there'd be a lease arrangement between the LDC and the village would pay lease payments to the LDC in an amount equal to pay the debt service on the bonds being issued. Kind of a little bit complicated. There's a lot of moving parts to it. And because there's a lot of moving parts to it, the costs of issuance involved in issuing conduit bonds are dramatically higher than what they'd be if you issue just general obligation bonds of the village. So much so that we would anticipate general obligation bonds of the village, maybe it's going to cost $110,000 to $125,000 cost of issuance for all the players: bond counsel, financial advisor, rating agency, financial printer, et cetera, et cetera. If indeed you do a conduit, there's additional levels of lawyers, there's fees to the conduit, there's annual fees that have to be paid. It's quite a bit different. But the benefit of the conduit, you don't have to go to the state legislature and say, we want an extension on the useful life, because the conduit issue wouldn't be constrained by the New York State local finance law, which is the law that Bob and I have to operate under. So the conduit is certainly an option, but again, at the end of the day, the village would be on the hook for the debt service. The conduit just gives you a lot more structuring flexibility. Let me just turn this next page. This next page, again, this is what people want to know: the cost comparison of the financing options. So this is simply the $35 million for the mothballing 15-year scenario, the 30-year scenario, and then the 30-year conduit financing scenario. And you'll notice that 35,000 goes up to 37,905 under the conduit financing, because in a revenue bond issue, the market requires that you establish something called a debt service reserve fund. And what that is it's a separate fund of money that's funded with bond proceeds when you sell the deal. And that money sits there and is invested, and it's used in the event that there aren't sufficient revenues to pay the bonds in any year. They would tap into the reserve fund. Now, because the village would ultimately be on the hook, we might get a creative banker who said maybe we can sell this without a reserve fund, which would be great, because then that would reduce the amount of debt that you have to issue by almost $3 million. And any debt you issue, you're paying interest on for the next 30 years. The other thing, of course, that merits mentioning, the way the village and all local jurisdictions in New York State sell debt, they sell it competitively, except for some extreme circumstances. If you're refinancing debt, the state allows you to go out and hire a banker and negotiate the deal with a banker. Or if you're selling a deal that's something of a what we call a story bond, this would be a story bond because of the structure with the village's guarantee backing up the conduit bonds. So because of that, I suspect we'd issue an RFP, a request for proposals. We go out, we hire an investment banker, and then the investment banker would work with Bob's firm, with your treasurer, with myself to put the deal together, market it, and sell it. Again, some of the numbers on the 30-year conduit deal are yet to be determined because it's all different kinds of structures. But the basic premise is that there would be this entity that would issue the debt through the conduit, and the village would backstop the debt service on that debt because there's no revenue stream to pay it otherwise. The next page, again, is just a comparison under the adaptive reuse scenario for 67.5 and the various costs. So it's pretty safe to say that if you look at the middle column, 30-year general obligation bonds issued by the village, the increase to a homeowner with a home value between $1 million and $1.5 million is $721. That's if it was issued as a general obligation bond. If it's issued as a conduit bond, immediately we know that it's no longer going to be a 65.795 issue because we have to fund the debt service reserve fund and we have to fund the additional cost of issuance. So the size of the issue jumps by about $7 million. So the annual impact to the taxpayer is going to be, quite a bit more than $721 a year. But again, keep in mind, 30 years versus 15 years. So even with the conduit borrowing, with the increased costs, the annual cost is going to be lower than it would if you paid it off over 15 years. Let me just step back and give you a concept which is interesting. So this building's a 100-plus-year-old building. What you're going to do is revitalize this building, depending on what option you go. Maybe the building's going to be in great shape for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Maybe I'm editorializing a bit. Why have the residents pay for it over 15 years when people are going to enjoy it for the next 30, 40, or 50 years? So for that reason, maybe 30 years might make sense. Just a thought. Just a thought. I think you have to look at it that way in terms of what the impact is. One thing that isn't included here, but certainly the group has discussed quite a bit, when we did this presentation in October of, I think, 23, and today, people might say, well, sure, once you issue this debt, now we've got a building. We've got to keep it heated. We've got to keep it lit. We've got to maintain. So there's going to be an ongoing maintenance expense to the building. I think that's been ballparked, and you probably have a better number than me. People say maybe it's $1 million to $2 million a year. So we don't want that piece of the puzzle to be missing. So addition to debt service, there'll be an annual maintenance expense of what's going to be a magnificent building. Well, I live in Manhasset. My kids play lacrosse on that field all the time. I mean, it's a heck of a building. We don't have anything like that in Manhasset. When we did, I think there was a St. Ignatius, there was a retreat on Shelter Rock Road, and they tore it down, and we still miss it. It was a shame that we couldn't salvage that. But again, I'm editorializing. That's the overview of the financial side. I hope that's helpful. I'm also going to be here for any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Hello. So we'll move on to the next slide, and I will just quickly review the calculation methodology that I used to come up with the numbers that you see in the survey in terms of what are the potential tax increases for my home if I fall into one of the 6 ranges that are included in the survey. The next slide, please. So you heard in detail Mr. Trustee Muldoon's explanation about the ballpark figures and the work that I did with bond counsel and CMA to come up with the years, right? So we did estimates based on the 15-year, which is, what we can issue today, and also for the 30 years in the event that we were approved by the legislation to extend our probable period of usefulness and be able to bond over 30 years. So on the survey, you will see those two options. We've also looked at, for everyone's ease, to look at, hey, if my property is within these values, what would I be paying at a maximum level? So the survey shows, if your home is valued between $500,000 and $1 million, between $1 million and $1.5 million, between $1.5 million and $2 million, between $2 million and $2.5 million, $2.5 million, $3 million, and $3 million plus, what the impacts would be to those home values. Now, when I made the calculation, I assumed the higher range of those values. So if you're looking for an example, I did a slide. I did one example. I looked at a home value between $1 million and $1.5 million. When we looked at the assessment roll, the big percentage of homes are valued between $1 million and $1.5 million. Now, just a little bit of more detail regarding that. It is not, when we look at the home values, it is not what you estimate your house could sell if you were to sell it today. We go with how we actually allocate taxes, right? So the village has an assessment roll. This assessment roll is on the village website. It's on under the finance department, and it has every single taxable property on there. It's a PDF. It's a very large document. It's over 1,000 pages. However, it's a searchable PDF. So if you were to open that document and type either your name or your address, your property will show up on there. And the village does have a full market value for your property. However, the last time the village did a full assessment was back in the 1950s. So these numbers could be significantly lower than what you can sell your home for, unless one or two things. You've either done recent improvement on your home, or if you also filed a tax grievance, it could go down. Improvements, it goes up. Tax grievances could go down. So we start off with what the assessed value for your home is on the village assessment roll. We also then take into account, when we're allocating taxes, we take into account the equalization rate. This rate is provided by the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance every year. It's a rate that they come up with for every municipality. It's different for every municipality, and it's intended to equalize or normalize, values for properties. So that will increase this full market value slightly. For last year is 1.22%. So at the end of the day, we arrive at a total taxable value for your property. Okay, so if you were to take the full market value times the equalization rate, that gets you that number. So for $1 million home, the total taxable value is $12,200. Okay, just as a standard. If you want to see what it is for your property, again, just go on the village website, search your address, and you'll get that number for yourself. So at the end of the day, we get total taxable values. We take all the total taxable values for all of the taxable properties in the village. And that number for last year was $106,711,000. That's how we allocate taxes. When we determine what's the taxes that we need to fund our annual budget, we take that number and we allocate it to all the assessed values of the property equally, and that's how your taxes go up by your assessed value. I'm explaining this a little bit because there's so many questions that have come up, and people are asking, why don't we just take the total debt and divide it equally between all the taxpayers to see what the average incremental tax would be? That's not how we allocate taxes. We do it exactly by looking at the assessed values. And so we try to give a more accurate number for you by coming up with assessed values and home values per the village's tax roll to give you a more accurate representation of what your personal taxes would increase if you were to select one of these options. Again, these numbers are extremely conservative and they're calculated based on the higher ranges. So again, if your home is between $1 million and $1.5 million, the numbers that were calculated on the survey is based on the $1.5 million. So if your home value is closer to $1 million, that's the max, and that's a higher number than what you would actually, wind up seeing. Okay. So for the example I have on the slide, again, this is just one example. This is for option A, the adaptive reuse, over a 30-year bond for $67.5 million principal that we would issue. The interest based on the information provided by CMA would be $58,589,000 added to that. So the annual principal and interest, that's the debt service that the village would incur on an annual basis over 30 years is $4.2 million. So we take that $4.2 million and allocate it to all the assessed values of the property, taxable assessed values of the village, and to come up with the tax rate effect per assessed value. That's how we came up with, on the survey, you'll see for $1 million home, it's $480. For $1.5 million value home value, it's $721. For $2 million, it's $962. For $2.5 million, it's $1,201. For $3 million, it's $1,441. And for $3.5 million, it's $1,682. All right, those are the numbers that you actually see in the survey. And that's how we calculated it. We took all the considerations into account on how we actually allocate taxes to come up with these numbers. Again, they're very conservative, but they give you a closer representation versus saying on average it's $1,000 per homeowner. That's not as accurate. These numbers break it down a little bit more to give you a better understanding of what that impact would be to you. And I think this concludes our portion of the presentation. And hopefully this will give you a little bit more insight into the survey numbers. Thank you.
One thing, as you're writing your questions down, if you have a question on bonds, et cetera, I'm going to collect them first, just so those gentlemen don't have to sit here too much longer. So just write them down. I'll collect them, but Mayor, go ahead.
All right, so I just want to interject a moment here as you're preparing your bond questions, and excellent presentation on the financing. I think that was hopefully very clear to everyone and beneficial. I do just want to circle back because I do think that perhaps some, and a lot of familiar faces here, but some may be new. And I just want to make it clear as to why I have asked for the backup and would like to upload the backup. Residents have requested backup. There are residents who are in the construction field. And I do think they have a right to take a look at what it is that and see if they are comfortable with it or uncomfortable with it. It's transparency. And I think St. Paul's is something we cannot be too transparent on. So as I mentioned at the last town hall, and I'll mention it to this audience again, if the gentleman can stop talking in the front, please. I'll mention it again. I did mention it at the last meeting. I have cautioned the board about the use of the Westerman report, which is the first thing mentioned there on that cost estimate, the March 30th, 2023 report. And I have advised them that I came to learn. I was mayor when that was hastily finalized. And I did know as of the last meeting that there had been perhaps some interference with the finalization of that report. You would think that we would hire a cost estimator because we wanted their professional opinion. They would let them do their professional work and provide us with that opinion. And regrettably, it didn't quite go that way. I have further information that it wasn't just one. There was a series of attempts at interference. So it's regrettable, but it's the truth, and it's something everyone should know. And to the extent the Westerman report is being used, it would be very helpful to know where it's being used and what numbers, so we could see if it's, valid as far as to the extent it was used. Um, just a simple, and I can upload, I know Vinny brought a packet, we can upload those if that's helpful. I have asked, I don't know why I've not gotten a response, and I don't want to make this back and forth. I just want to share with everyone how we got to this. I know Pratt was mentioned, and I think the reason I think people who are asking would like to know, who are the companies, and are they companies that do government projects? Do they do projects of this scope? That's something people are entitled to know as far as where the numbers came from. I know Pratt was just mentioned, and we all know Pratt, the village contracts with Pratt, but I don't see Pratt on the list of contractors. So that just confuses me a little bit. I know Chris Bodie I dealt with, he was fantastic on the stained glass windows. I mentioned to Vinny, let's go to him and get the number. He'll know it. He knows the windows. And I am sure he'd be happy to send us an email if he didn't already. That's an easy bit of backup, so we don't have to be concerned about whether we have the right numbers. So there's a long history here, and I know that Mr. Tutor, I can tell, is a lover of old buildings, which is wonderful, but he may not be familiar with the backstory, on St. Paul's and the challenges we've had, and why I think it's so important that we go above and beyond and be completely transparent in everything we do. And it's not meant as an attack on anyone's integrity. Let's just show it all. So there you have it.
Okay, the question is, if financing is done by municipal bonds by the village, are they, the village, able to accept donation, pledges, et cetera, to bring down the cost? Also, how about if it is an LDC? You might as well.
Watch your step with the wires.
The answer to that question, you can hear me, right? Yeah. The answer to that question is yes, of course. As I mentioned earlier, the constitutional requirement is that the village issue pay its debt from real property taxes or any other available sources, including donations. And I know you have a lot of that going on in this village. So what you would do is factor that into the financial plan. You would authorize the amount of debt that you thought you needed to accomplish the project. And use any other source of funds that may be donated. There's not a problem with that. Also true with an LDC. There's no circumstance under which donated funds could not be contributed to pay part of the cost of the project.
I might just add that a financing of this size with a long construction period, it's often the case that you just don't go right into the bond market and issue one set of bonds and you're done. Very often you issue a set of short-term bond anticipation notes, typical term of 12 months. Maybe you do that for the soft cost. Maybe it's $3, $5, $10 million. Then when those notes come due, then perhaps, depending on where you are in the construction process, you might issue another set of notes, add new money to it. When those notes come due, now 24 months later, now you have to start paying back the debt. At that point, depending on market conditions, you could go into the bond market and lock it up in fixed rate bonds, or if we think interest rates are on their way down, maybe we'd say, let's stay in note for another year. You can stay in notes for as long as 5 years. And in this scenario, I bring it up because if indeed there's a public campaign to raise funds, any funds that are raised, you could use to pay down those notes so that you're ultimately going to bonds with a much smaller par amount to reduce your interest expense for the life of the loan.
Okay, next question for you guys. What rights might be given up or what restrictions might be imposed by an Albany approved 30-year bond?
Presumably none. Anything could happen in Albany, I suppose, but the only ask to Albany would be a discrete amendment to the local finance law. Local finance law, I think there are either 109 or 110 different periods of probable usefulness listed in the law right now. One is for sidewalks, one is for roads, one is for buildings, one is for whatever, all these things, everything you can think of. And that's the legislative intent. It would cover every type of project there is. So what would happen is the ask would be to take subdivision 11A, 12A, which says a period of probable usefulness for a building with some wood in it is 15 years. We just put an asterisk after that and say, except in the event, except in the case of the St. Paul's project in Garden City, the period of probable usefulness shall be 30 years. So I would not expect as any that's the only legislative ask, and that's the only way that the law would be changed. So I don't think there'd be any other impact in terms of something in return or anything like that. Now, it's possible legislators might say, however, and I've seen this, might not apply in this case, but in similar circumstances, I've seen the caveat thrown in. However, the amount of debt issued shall not exceed X number of dollars, and in this case, it'd be 70 or 80 or 90 or whatever you think it should be. That's possible that question would come up or something like that.
Something I think probably needs to just be fleshed out. And what's the likelihood you'd get the extension to 30 years? In my experience, and Bob probably has more experience in this than I do, I think you would get it. I don't think it's unreasonable for the legislature, once they hear the story, to say, okay, in this instance, it's a big expense. It's a relatively small village of like 7,200 households, I want to say. I think you would get it. Do you concur with that?
You hate to make predictions on things, how things are going to go in Albany, but yeah, as I said before, I think there's a case to be made on several levels. The importance of this building to the community, I think, has been demonstrated over the last 30 plus years. The very large dollar amount and the small number of parcels. So yes, I think it's a good case to be made.
Okay, I have a question and I didn't write it down, but I'm going to ask it. Okay. When in the process would you apply for that 30-year extension?
Right now, it
Oh,
has to happen before you really start making plans. Well, you can do whatever you like, but you can't issue debt until you had the 30-year in place. If you wanted to
Right,
use the
right.
30 years, it would not be wrong to wait, but I think the only logical thing to do is to do it immediately, get the ball rolling. It might take a year to do. So,
Yeah,
you have to you're dealing with when the legislature is in session and when they're interested in hearing a bill like this, and et cetera.
Yes.
So we'd start right away, start working with the Rod, Senator, state legislature.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your giving up your Saturday greatly. So it was very helpful. Okay, maybe Michelle and Vinny, if you want to just sit up here, because you'll probably get the bulk of the questions. We don't tap dance. And I'll start with the questions we have. We'll certainly collect any others that are out there as we go along. Does anybody else have a question written down that I didn't get yet? Some I'll take, some I won't. Yours twice.
Yeah, right.
That could be a problem. Hold on one sec. For those on chat, on Zoom rather, if you put a question in chat, we'll get to that. We'll do the questions in the room first. Okay, these are in no particular order, so we'll just go through them. Thank you. I know many people have pledged significant donations, and of course there could be opportunities for small donations and grants. How could that work? Conservancy? I believe that was just answered, right? Where he talked about how donations would be applied. Good. Go ahead.
So donations received by the village go through a process. Any donation over a certain amount have to be approved by the board. The board then can also allocate those funds, those donations, and set up a special reserve to be used specifically for the purpose of St. Paul's. So there are reserve funds that can be established so that those funds are guaranteed to be used for that specific purpose. Those would be donations. Yes, correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Needs. What is the intended use of the repaired building? Do these functions / amenities exist nearby? And how will these compete with nearby amenities? So the intended use we will get from the survey, right? That's the first part of the survey we talked through is kind of what would resident priorities be? And that will, so we'll get that information after we have the survey. So it could, as you'll see in the survey we talked about, right? It ranges the gamut from art studios to, you know, potentially indoor tracks or swimming pools or whatever. There's a whole list that you'll choose. So that is a TBD. Do these functions or amenities exist nearby? Most likely some do and some don't, would be my guess. We do hear a lot of feedback from residents about having to go to other villages for particular activities or sporting activities, et cetera, and they would prefer to have them at home. So we would do some review of not only do residents prefer that, but do we need it, right? So we would look at what's nearby as well. And how will these compete with nearby amenities? Again, I think that gets back to what they are and what is nearby. But we do get fairly significant feedback from residents that they would, you know, rather stay here than go to, you know, practice XYZ somewhere else. So, oh, thank you. And BCI, thank you, Mary. BCI would help us with that evaluation as well, taking a look at what's here, what's there, et cetera, and what makes sense. Okay, cost. What will be the percentage increase in real estate taxes to repair the building or to maintain the building? So to repair the building is in the survey, right? We said that was sort of the third segment, sorry. And that talks about what the potential tax increase is based on the selection that you make, right? So the potential tax increase would be different for each particular option. So that is in there and it's outlined for your particular market value of your home. The tax increase to maintain the building would be based on operating costs, right? Which we just heard were, you know, and this is ballpark, right? They said between $1 million and $2 million, which is what we've kind of heard as we've talked this through a bit, either with BCI. Well, right, that's a fair point. It all depends what the program is, what was just stated here. So what the potential real estate tax increase to maintain depends on what we're going to do with it. Yep.
Thank you. Thanks, Judy. So we've talked about this extensively with the new St. Paul's Advisory Committee, and they're looking at every possible angle of thinking outside the box, and there are different ways to do this to help cover these costs. So in their final report, they are going to come up with some ideas so the taxpayer is not on the hook for all the operating and maintenance costs of the building. That's number one. Number two, when it comes to, I talked about the geothermal and the solar. The whole idea is to make those energy bills the least they possibly can. And that is a part of the cost initially to invest in the building, to make those bills substantially less. Like we can if we do this properly, and the solar can run the pumps for the geothermal, which is the big cost. Those pumps run constantly. They're pumping the water up from the ground. We can keep the energy bills in that building, which is a huge part of running a building like that. You know, one part of it, to a very little amount. The other way is also, depending on the programs, Judy, you can chime in on this as well, is depending on the programs we run, there will be revenue generated from the building. There's no question about that. The question is how much and what those programs are. Right? So those, to me, are your three main sources of how those operating and maintenance costs would be covered. And also, you know, there is a situation, certainly no guarantee whatsoever. But I have talked to a couple of people There is situations where some donations may be or could be attributed to the operating and maintenance costs. So again, we're looking at every angle. There's nothing sure yet. There's nothing certain yet. But a part of what the St. Paul's Advisory Committee is doing is they're looking at some very, again, unique, outside the box ways that other villages in Long Island are covering some of these costs in the villages by being creative in other ways and not just the taxpayer paying for it all. So that's our goal. Okay.
There's, for instance, out on the east end of Long Island, there are a lot of different organizations where, like the Peconic Land Trust, or how they look at when their property is sold one way or another. Sometimes there's an assessment, and that is being paid for by the buyer of the property. And so sometimes it's 0.5% or 1% of what the value of the house is. And so that's something that we as a village might consider to be using to pay for the maintenance and operation.
Good, thank you. All right, our next question says, what would be the cost and timeline if the board voted to demolish St. Paul's?
The only cost we have right now in regards to demolition is from the Westerman report. That's number one. Time frame. I have no idea time frame, but I do know one thing. And again, people have asked me all the time, you know, again, about why is demolition not on the table? From the board meeting back in March, I believe, of 2024. And this is, again, Mary and the committee, Mary specifically saying this, and I agree with her. This is what she said, black and white. At this point, we are searching for a company to help us in our goal of finding a project at St. Paul's that preserves part or all of the building as widespread community support can be executed. That was Mayor's her own words, specifically saying that we're moving forward after the last vote and doing exactly that, hiring BCI to take the next step in finding projects that the majority of the village will support, preserving part or all of the building. Nothing got to do with demolition. That's why it is what it is.
Okay, next question, two-part question. If, quote, will not support gets the majority of responses, will the board ignore that and proceed to the top-ranked choice provided? And I'll give you this, answer that question first, because they're kind of different. So,
It's a group.
Yeah,
I mean, I
go-
think you'd have to talk about it.
Yeah, we're going to take all the information we get back and we're going to look at it and we're going to analyze it and we're going to figure out what the majority wants to do with the building. You know, that's it. But we're not going to get ahead of ourselves, but we're going to take everybody's view into account that takes the effort, and I hope everybody does, to fill out the survey and tell us what they want. And if a majority wants this, we're going to have to analyze it and go with that. If the majority wants this, but we don't know yet. We're in the survey process, but that's why we need all the information, because if everybody tells us what they want, then we'll get a real sense of, you know, because there's so many different things that can be done to that building. You know what? It's up to everybody to tell us what they want, and then as a board, we will make the decision what we think is in the best interest of the village, that we have the majority of the support, exactly like what Mary said in that previous statement, the widespread support. We're not going to take the little piece, you know, and just say, we're going to do that. We're going to look at the big picture and take all and every opinion into account.
if resident response to, quote, willingness to pay comes out to be well below the cost of projects, how does the board square that circle? I think you talked about that, right? That we would manage to what that number comes out to be that
Yeah.
residents choose.
So like if we found out that if we had to issue, like if it made sense to issue a 30-year bond and we only had the ability, like households really didn't want to pay more than $600 a year, we'd have to see what we could do. And then we come and say to you, hey, here's what the village is saying. Here's what you guys are comfortable paying for. This is what we can put in the building with that approximate cost, that much money. And here's what we could get for you. We could do the dance program. We can do a theater program. We can do robotics. We can't do a swimming pool. We can't do a new turf field or whatever it is, you know, so we'd talk about it, and there'd be a lot more of these kind of meetings to talk about it so that residents are comfortable with it.
Yeah, correct,
We're
Michelle.
not
That's,
going to make the decision just
Yeah.
by ourselves.
we've said
so-
it. We've said it from day one, and we're going to say it again. We're going to keep saying it. is this is resident driven. I know some people think it's not. I don't know why they wouldn't. You know what? Everybody is going to have a say, but eventually you have to do what you think is in the best interest of the village and the majority of the people are in agreement with. And that's what we're going to do as a board, like every other board has done, do what we think is in the best interest of the village based on what the majority of the village wants. And we're going to do that both on what they'd like to see done with St. Paul's. No idea right now what that is, but we're going to find out. And also what they're comfortable spending. We'll combine the two of them. We'll sit down as a board. We'll have lots of conversations with ourselves and with you guys as we move forward. But one thing we are going to do, and I can say this comfortably tonight, we are going to make a decision. And we're going to stop the surveys. We're going to stop with the consultants. We're going to stop wasting money repairing the building. And we're going to do something. We don't know what that is yet, but we are going to put this thing to bed and make a decision, I think, comfortably by the end of this year and move forward. Whatever that is, we still don't know what that is, but we got to do something. And we will sit down, we will make some tough decisions, and we will go with what the majority of the village wants.
And that's why that number, the request for you to put in, like, what's the maximum you feel comfortable with, is so important to us.
Mhm. Okay, I think we answered this. With the 30-year general obligation bond, what are the chances of approval of the bond from the state Senate and the Assembly? So I think both of our guests really spoke to that while you can't say what would happen in Albany, there was a sense that there is a likelihood that it could be passed, but I wouldn't give a number on that chance.
And on something like this, we'll go out, like, once the survey is out, and even before, I think, we talked about in one of our meetings, like with Bob Smith, like, how would we start? Would we start with an Ed Raw? Would we start with our other senators? Would, we go and talk to Elaine Phillips and see what's going on in Nassau County? So I think, like, we realize this is a big deal for us. It's going to take a long time. We're going to have to get political in the sense of meeting all the politicians that are in our area and even outside of our area.
Plus, we have
Because-
the lobbyists too
Yeah,
that
we
we're
have a-
working with as
Right,
well,
and we
Michelle.
have a lobbyist. And, and there are a lot of people who, when I tell them that we're talking about this situation with St. Paul's, and, people are like, people want to demolish that? I mean, it doesn't matter. I'm like, yes, it does. But, there's a lot of different opinions of senators, not just here, but around the state that'll look different. We'll look at a St. Paul's either favorably or not favorably. So it'll be important for us to reach out to the state as well.
Under the rule of Simon Says, before anything happens, the Board of Trustees has to pass a resolution requesting that action be taken. So thereafter, we move forward and go to all of the legislatures and whatever people we have to see in order to make that event occur.
Okay. Bruce, did you have a follow-up?
You want-
Thanks, Michelle. I spoke to both Bob Smith and Richard, and they said realistically, it will take a while. And one of the things that we have to think about is the political climate up in Albany and how they look at different things and how they look at various villages. So we hope it gets done, but it's not going to be as easy as we think.
I think they said, as is anything in Albany with something.
Just to finish up on that note, and then we can go to the next question. The conversations I've had with Bob and those guys there was very, very similar. Generally speaking, approximately, again, it's just a gauge, about a year of a process, approximately, no guarantees. And we have a really good case. That's, no guarantees on anything, but just like they said earlier, we have a good case to make as to why we need to move it to 30 years. And again, your biggest case to me would be it's not fair to put the burden, especially on the older generation that's here, and put everything on the first 15 years and not spread it out over basically 3 decades of people who will, if we decide to move forward with one of these projects at St. Paul's, that everybody can enjoy it, but not getting penalized, especially the older generation on the last 15 years that they're going to spend here and foot the entire bill. I think it's a fairness issue as well.
Okay, next question. partial renovation instead of uh, building a 10,000, let me read this again, sorry. Partial renovation instead of building 10,000 square feet. Why not increase adaptive reuse to 35,000 square feet? So I'll make a comment and I'm sure Vinny, you can jump in. I think it's important to realize they are two very different options, okay? So they are two different choices for a different purpose. And I'll let you explain that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, if you just look at it, it's taking the next step after adaptive reuse. If the majority of people say, yes, we want to go all in, we want to do the adaptive reuse, and we want this new building, we want to take down a part of the rear of the building and do this really cool architecture, and that's what the majority of people are willing to foot the bill on and do, then, okay, well, like everything else, we're going to listen to that vote. But also, you can take that, hypothetically, that extra 13 million spread out hopefully over 30 years and decide we want a new tennis pavilion, we want a new this, we want a new that. It's just giving people ideas and options right now, and they will come back and tell us, hey, you know what I'd like this, or I'd like that. We're going to get a ton of this. Hopefully, if people just go ahead and fill out the survey and tell us what they want. So many different options. It's just given that option to take the next step. It does increase the budget by about 13 million, something in that range. So we'll listen to the public and they'll tell us what they want. And if the majority of people say, you know what, we want all in and we're willing to spend $90 million for that kind of a project, well, then we'll listen to them like we'll listen to anybody else.
Right. And remember, the theory behind option B is that it gives you that extra square footage to do things you couldn't do in the existing building, right? Like maybe a turf field or something like that. That's why it's there. Okay, next question. Who analyzes the survey results and what are their qualifications? So the survey results are analyzed in two parts, right? Once they are received and we cut it off, right? We're giving residents 2 to 3 weeks to respond. It goes to a company called ETC, who always works with BCI. So sorry for the acronyms. What ETC does is literally tabulate the results, right? So many votes for this, so many votes for that, so many votes. So you get the raw data from ETC. That is why that company exists. You can look them up online, but they have qualifications. They've done this for years, right? So these are specifically survey tabulation companies. Once ETC calculates the raw data, they hand it back to BCI, and BCI does the analysis for us. They'll say X% here, X% there. They'll do some correlation for us. They'll say, what we noticed is that residents who have most of their household under 15 years old want this, but residents who have households that are only 2 people over 55 don't want that. They want something else. So they'll do all that correlation for us as well. And then they'll hand us from BCI a final report of what the data indicated. So 2-step process. Organizations that they work together all the time. This is not a new partnership between them. This is how they calculate the data. And then we will get back both the raw data and the final report. So as a senior citizen, not me, as a senior citizen, I support the readaptation of St. Paul's as a community center. I'm willing to pay for one year-round family community center, fostering families and community, serve the underserved, art, cultural, music, theater, dance, and advanced programmings, and programs for the aging out, young adults, neurodivergent, seniors, etc. It's everything. So I think that's just a state.
Yes.
Gotta work.
Good one, George.
Good. So George didn't have a question. He
There
just
you
had a
go.
thank you. Thank you.
I do think, though, that ties into a very important point that I know some people in the room realize, but I think it's important for us to make it clear. This building has came up for a lot of residents about the senior center. And they said, Vinny, you're not going to force anybody to go and, to St. Paul's, right? I'm like, not forcing anybody to do anything. Senior center is going to stay the senior center. But obviously, one of the options that I think the majority of people would support, that if the seniors want to have an area and want to enjoy St. Paul's, a space in St. Paul's, obviously, you know what? There would also be an area in St. Paul's, a secondary, this is just my view and opinion from talking to a lot of seniors. A lot of people love this senior center and want to stay here, and there's going to be no issues with that whatsoever, zero. But also, if you would like to go to St. Paul's one day and we go ahead and do one of these projects, certainly there should be a beautiful area over there for the seniors to go over there and enjoy it, because obviously there'd be an entrance to be able to go in there and onto the first floor or second floor, whatever it ends up being. So I just want to make it very clear, because I've had a lot of concerns about some seniors asking me that question, and I made it very clear. Senior center is here. It's going to stay here. So just want to make that clear.
Okay, next question. What do you expect will go in the building with adaptive reuse? So I'll give a quick answer and then anyone else can jump in. So the real answer is it depends, which is an answer we all hate, but it depends on what the survey says. There are options for what could go in there. We actually have some renderings in the back about what some of those rooms could look like, depending upon what the rooms are structured to be and obviously what your choices are. But you'll see in the survey, the first series of questions that you're asked to respond to about what programs you prefer are those that are most well suited to adaptive reuse. So they talk about dance programs, arts programs, meeting rooms, senior activities, STEM programs, those kinds of things, they would be included. Also, I just want to mention, whichever option, if any, that we go on, there will also be a concerted effort to make sure we have inclusion programs, that we have these rooms and facilities available for those who are either developmentally disabled, on the spectrum, et cetera. So we want to make sure that everybody knows that those types of programs are also listed in the survey and you have the ability to give that a priority, and that will be a priority for us as well.
Yeah, we discussed that as we were going through this process, how important it is. The whole idea of doing a community and recreation center is to do what we're doing here today. And that's to bring everybody together, but bring the 4-year-olds, the 10-year-olds, the 20-year-olds, the 40-year-olds, the 60-year-olds, bring the entire community. That's the way it's designed, right? Bring the entire community together in different parts of the building so they can all see each other and hang out with each other. And the seniors can work with the young people can work with the seniors, the disabled, you name it. To me, this is just my view, and I think most people would agree with this, is that you want something for everybody. But again, it's about how much can we afford? How much are you willing to pay for it? But to me, it's about inclusion in regards to making sure there's something for everybody. Because again, there are certain rooms in St. Paul's, I've told you before, that are huge and are magnificent, and there are other smaller rooms. There are rooms that can be, smaller rooms taken out and make it bigger spaces by removing bearing walls and putting in some steel. But again, it's about the feeling of bringing everybody together in one amazing building. That is what Mary's committee did with all the great work they did about going around and looking at all these great community centers and what we're missing in Garden City and have been missing for a long time. So we'll see how it all goes.
An example that we're doing right now that has been really successful is the community chess, where we have the Jane family children are working with young students who are really good chess players or trying to learn to play chess. And they meet with the seniors here at the senior center. And we have, I don't know if it's once a month or every other week, and they get to be friends and buddies. And then at the end of the year, we kind of have a chess tournament and a cake, and they celebrate it. So that's something that's really cool. We've also, we also talked about with the aspect of children that are autistic or neurodivergent. I don't know all the proper terminology, but we've also talked about really making sure that those types of programs are included in whatever we do, because there are so many children like that. And one of the things that we also really wanted to make sure of is that we have programs where, the neurodivergent children or the autistic children are playing with normal everyday kids. And I don't know if I'm using the right terminology, so I don't mean to be not using their correct terminology, but that's something that we think is very, very important for this village to do, whether it's all playing soccer together or cards or Parcheesi or Monopoly or whatever it is. But that's something that when we're looking at all the stuff and we're eventually, if, things pass, but that's something we think as a village is very important to consider.
Bring the community together. That's the whole goal.
Okay. I'm going to read this and I'm probably not going to read it correctly, so whoever wrote it can correct me. With the 30-year lease is served is a conduit, how many of those 30 LLCs have little or no reuse? Oh, sorry. It's kind of bad. Thank you, thank you. Sorry.
I spoke to bond counsel and our finance guy, Bob and Bob Smith and Rich. They have not done a conduit or third-party LLC with this type of situation where you have a 125,000 square foot building that's 150 years old. What they've done is maybe a museum that they wanted to renovate. They talked about the arena during the presentation, a library, but this is something they haven't gotten involved with a conduit. And of course, there's some situations where the village would be turning over to the third party LLC or conservancy control of the property. I certainly do not feel comfortable with that. But anyway, that's what they said, and that's my question. I guess I did. Okay.
I don't think when we're talking about any type of conduit that we're looking to give up control of the property.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one as well. Bruce, thank you. Yeah, there's no way I can only speak for myself, but I think the majority of the board will agree with this one. We're never going to give up control of St. Paul's outside the village. Now, again, if you do something, again, whether it's a conduit, where again, it makes more sense somehow for the betterment of the village and the taxpayers, we'll look at that. When it comes to actually giving up control, no way, no how. And also with the parkland status, there is no way you can do that anyway, in my view. I mightn't be 100% correct on that. But either way, there's no giving up control to any outside source when it comes to St. Paul's, period.
Okay, next question. There's no legal prohibition on funding using a public-private partnership, correct? Such conduit financing is regularly used in New York, and Hawkins has been involved in such fundings. Yeah, I don't. So we'll keep this and we'll get an answer. Thank you.
I don't know if Parkland is the Parkland designation, and I don't know, Rich, if you know the answer, but Parkland designation, I don't think we can do public-private partnership financing.
So let's find out so we're sure. It's a good question. It's a good question.
It is good.
Okay, Mr. Muldoon alluded to activities and facilities that St. Paul's is definitely not suited for. What are those?
We don't have enough time. St. Paul's is a very unique building. We all know that. And again, honesty is the only way. I've been in there 1,000 times. There are rooms that are 8 feet by 12 feet, literally like the width of the table by like 12 feet long for small bedrooms. There were dorms, right? The kids slept there. And then there are the most magnificent rooms, 1,000 square feet, and they're huge. So the reality is the basement, to me, I couldn't believe how big that basement was with 10-foot ceilings. So there's possibilities depending on the programs all over St. Paul's. The trick will be based on what, again, the residents want, the programs we can put in there. There are a lot of things for sure I feel like we can definitely put in that building, but there's also areas where it's just not going to be conducive to different things based on square footages. For instance, right? You can't put in a full-size turf field in St. Paul's. It's just be almost impossible to do that. You don't have the space, you don't have the rooms. So there's different things that are just too big to put within the building. People have had this conversations about swimming pools, right? And they've asked, could you put a swimming pool in St. Paul's? The answer to that is yes. But what size would the swimming pool be? How would you ventilate it if it's an indoor swimming pool, obviously? So again, there's nothing but options, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's just have the discussion, see what people would want. And then eventually, if it's going to move forward, then the architects and the engineers and the designers will be able to show us what can fit, what can't fit based on the programs and what the majority of people want in the building. It's all one step at a time.
Next question. Mothballing sounds like primarily exterior work. What work, if any, will be done inside with that option?
Okay, that's an easy one. Again, mothballing, if you want to use a term, if you want to sister it with a term that's easier to understand, it's preserving the building for future use. And on the interior, the exterior will be completely restored and renovated with a small amount of landscaping and asphalt and paving work done on the exterior. So again, when you drive by, you're like, wow, that's magnificent. But when you open the door, the building is basically gutted out and unfinished on the inside. It would just have lighting. The abatement would be done. You can see it on that. If you come up later and you look at the chart, you'll see it on there. In the budget for mothballing is the abatement needs to be done. The majority of the interiors need to be stripped out, the old plaster. Now, I'm going to throw in another little tidbit in there. The majority of St. Paul's is built out of brick, plaster, and concrete insulation panels that was used at the time to actually insulate the building, because originally it was steam. The heating system was steam, right? So the majority of the building is actually, brick and concrete. There's not a lot of wood. The only wood is decorative wood and the floor joist system. So the floor joist system, what we're standing on here, is wood. They're wood floor joists, and there's a crawl space underneath our feet right here. St. Paul's has wood floor joists. Majority of them are 4x10s and 4x12s with subflooring on top of their tongue and groove subflooring. Again, like I said, the majority, not the majority, a certain percentage of that flooring has decayed and has rotted out because of roof damage and water filtration. My point is, you need to dry out the building. It's very, very important. Westerman and all the other reports, if you ever read through them, that all tell you the same thing. Eventually get to drying out the building, remove all the materials that have moisture in them, get rid of them, strip them all out, and ventilate the building and remove the moisture. That's what you would do in mothballing. So when you walk inside the door, it would be safe to walk around. The abatement would be done. Interior demo would be done. You'd have all temporary lighting within the building, but there would be no conditioning in the building. It would just naturally condition itself. There'd be a certain amount of moisture in there just because there's the lack of climatizing the building. But that's what mothballing would do. As long as the roof is tight, windows, the brick is sealed, everything else is good, you're eliminating 95% of the moisture issues.
So let me ask you, the big picture that we've all seen over the last couple of years where we have that one part of the building where the ceiling has kind of fallen out and the floor on the second floor is all opened up, and then even a little bit on the first floor. If we did mothballing, we would fix that.
Yes, in order to do mothballing in regards to the interior work, to do the abatement and the interior demo, you need to make it safe in certain areas. And I would be probably 5 to 8%. I don't think it's 10, but it could be 10. Of floor areas that are not safe to walk on. I've been in there, like I said earlier tonight, a tremendous amount of time over the last 6 months. And I've walked around the entire building. I know where those areas are that I can't go because they're not safe. So those areas would be demoed out, removed, shored, so they're safe. And then you would put in new floor joists, new plywood, just like you would if you're redoing your house in an old bathroom, an old kitchen. And it would be just left unfinished with the lighting, and, where you go from there.
Okay, if I own a home or condo in Garden City and rent it out, who gets the survey, the tenant or me, the owner? If the tenant, why? Okay, so the survey is mailed to the household, right? So the tenant, quote unquote, if they open the mail that says resident, they open that survey. If they are instructed not to open mail except for what is addressed to them, they shouldn't open the survey, and you can get it from your tenant. We don't have, right? We don't have records about who's a tenant and who's not and who's a renter, et cetera. So if you do have that situation, and you are not in the village right now, but you're renting out your home, you could ask that tenant to give you that survey to fill out. If you have a second home, right, that you're renting out, you could instruct that tenant not to fill it out if you so choose. Okay. Why can't we have a binding referendum on all 3 choices?
A referendum is only for the actual bonding of the
The
project.
amount of money.
So when we decide how much money, if we decide that you guys, everybody in the village wants to do adaptive reuse, and we figure out it's going to be a $65 million deal, then we'll go for a bond referendum. And you guys saw the thing we talked about, permissive and mandatory.
Right.
So again, we'd all go through explaining everything again to everybody so that everyone's clear onto what we're doing, how we're doing it, et cetera. So nothing will be smoke and mirrors. Everything will be laid out very deliberately.
Good. Next question. Is facadism the same as partial replacement? If so, why the name change? If not, what is the difference? I'll let you.
I think you can let me handle that one. Facadism is basically saving the exterior shell of part of the building, all of the building, you know, that's facadism is preserving the exterior of the building and then building a new building behind there. Typically facadism was designed for interior cities and historical areas where that city said, hey, to the builder, the developer that comes in, if you want to redo the building and demo the whole building, we'll let you do that, but you have to save the facade, right? So that's what facadism was initially designed for. Historical areas, got to keep that. Charleston would be the perfect example of a city that facadism is just par for the course. You cannot touch the front of those buildings. You can do what you want behind the buildings because most of those buildings are attached. When it comes to St. Paul's, Westerman, going back to their report again, because that's the most recent report we have on some of that stuff. They gave a proposal to do facadism and to basically remove 75% of the building, save the front of the building and the returns of two wings, build and erect a set of steel to support the facade, and then redo those facades. They projected that to be somewhere in the $40 to $50 million range. And then if you wanted to put a new building behind there equivalent to that, it was 120 million. It was about 100,000 square feet. If you wanted it, you don't have to put the same size building, but you have to put a substantial building behind it because two things. Otherwise, support-wise is one, but more so because of how it's going to look as a building. But facadism, again, we looked at facadism. A lot of people mentioned facadism, but the reality with facadism, in order to just to do the facadism and get no return on the building would be about $50,000 or $50 million. Okay, that was their quote that they did. This was Westerman report back at the time. Okay, and then if you wanted to build a building behind it, then you have to go ahead and spend an enormous amount of money as well. So again, when it comes to St. Paul's, I've said this on record, and I'm going to say it again tonight. It's my view only. It's a ridiculous option unless it gives you something of value. Facadism with St. Paul's doesn't give you anything of value. If I owned a building, beautiful building down in Charleston, and I wanted to save the front facade of that beautiful building and build a new building behind there, it would be a great idea. Fantastic. I'd be all in. I'd be the first one to put up my hand. Fantastic. Makes sense. Save the facade, build a new building behind it. We have a freestanding 125,000 square foot Gothic masterpiece sitting over there. Why would we spend 50 million to get nothing? No.
The other thing that you have to take into account, because there would be so much demolition of the building, we'd probably have to do an entirely new environmental
You'd
impact
have to
study,
do a new
which will take about
EIS.
2 years.
I'm just going to speak to this a minute because I think facadism is a term. There are many different, there are different interpretations and projects. What is facadism and when does it change from facadism to partial preservation? And part of the parting of ways really with my committee and the village was when a decision was made to not include facadism, any form of facadism in the survey. I do think it remains somewhat unclear as to option B, because I've heard Vinny say publicly and on social media, option B, you're saving the entire building, but we're building something else behind. But there was some talk today that it could involve removing a wing, removing the 3 wings. I don't know. I think there's some clarity, but as far as facadism, I do want to say, and I spoke with, and I don't think he's here, a former mayor who worked on a plan for a rec center that I would call a facade plan. And there were presentations that have recently been shared. The fact that there's a hockey rink, I think people like to call it the hockey rink plan, but the hockey rink was really just a placeholder that was put in there because hockey is space that is revenue, the thought that it could bring in revenue concerns on the operating costs. But I do see on a lot of interest whenever it's put out there, the idea of a state-of-the-art rec center behind the front of this gorgeous building, like that might be the thing that had widespread community support. As far as I understand, that's off, as, you know, we're moving off this survey. You know, if we don't have support for these three, will it come back? I don't know. I do think they had gotten some cost estimates. I think part of the, I'm a little concerned with the extraordinary cost, because I do have information. There is a distaste for facadism amongst some preservationists, which I understand and respect, and people are entitled to hate facadism, and some people hate facadism. But I don't think it should be taken away from the village as an option, which is, I think, what happened with that Westerman report. And what I was alluding to was an attempt to make facadism look extremely expensive, a direction to put 125,000 square foot building behind the facade in the pricing, which no one really ever thought would want a 125 square foot building. So anyway, that's just the longer answer. The facade question is sort of a big one. And I think, you know, sometimes maybe it's better not to use the term, but I do think it captures what, you know, many people are interested in, but
As a resident, I always thought facadism made really a lot of sense because I always thought it would be the most economical. But as we learned by being on the different committees and talking to Joe Jabor, because the way our building, this beautiful St. Paul's building is built and structured, it's extremely, extremely expensive versus just a traditionally structured older building. And that's why it's so expensive. And that's why the numbers seem out of place. I think the other thing is, like, you know, when I thought about it, my goal was always like, wow, wouldn't it be cool? Yeah, if we did just keep the outside, you know, the three parts of it, and opened up the back and put glass and put metal, and we put a pool in there, and, you know, we had like green space in there, maybe even, you know, some aspect of eventually putting like a turf field on the top of the field house. So we had a soccer field over there, like all these things. But when you look at it, it's extremely expensive. And the most economical facadism is something where it's a not very pleasant or good looking steel structure behind the building that I don't think most of us would want to really look at. But, you know, initially I was of the mindset, like, facadism to me seemed very cool. And, you know, you go to schools like Williams College or Middlebury or Amherst, and you see how they put together and take the old and put the new, and it's beautiful. You go to like
Yeah.
the JP Morgan museum in the city on Madison Avenue, and they have the old with the new. And it's like, God, I wish we could do that, but we need like somehow an Elon Musk donation to do something like that.
All right, just be quick.
Yeah.
all right. So I do want to share, because that is some of the information that I think perhaps has been put out there, maybe unfairly. BCI did say that a facade project is not necessarily more expensive than adaptive reuse. It's all going to depend on your programming. I think Brian Donahue was here earlier, has stepped out. Stand up if you're still here. But that video, if you saw that, and I assume most of you in the building or in the room here have watched that. You walked in, you had the beautiful, you know, the beautiful buildings, rooms in the front were refinished. It kept the staircase, and I think that skylight above, and then you got to the top of the stairs and it was a recreation facility. And I believe he said that their ballparks were like 80 to 110. That was like 5 years ago. But just to give you an idea, yes, a lot of money, but this is a lot of money too, right?
Yeah.
So, and the use, so.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of money, but let me just finish on this one note, just from a construction perspective. What Mary is talking about, actually, she's correct on that note. In regards to, I actually just last week I watched that, so it's fresh in my mind. Their idea was different. Their idea was not really for facadism. Their idea was to take down parts of the building, save the front of the building, remodel the front of the building, and then add a new building, whether it was a hockey rink. That's not facadism. No. Let me finish. Facadism is saving the face of any structure of the building and putting a new building inside it. The problem you have with St. Paul's is because architecturally and structurally, the way it was built and the bearing walls were built, okay, that it makes it very, very difficult to make use of the interior space where you have to put the steel structure to support the facade. So in essence, And this was Westerman that says, listen, you can debate all day long about the other stuff. But what they basically said was, in order to save the three parts of the facade and then put basically an aluminum panel back on the back of the building, it was going to be approximately 50 million. So why would I save three sides, put an erector set and aluminum panels in the back of a building for 50 million when I could mothball it, keep it looking spectacular, you know what I mean, and give the next generation the ability to use the building for 40 million, 50 million for zero versus 40 million with giving the next generation a chance with a beautifully restored building to use it in the future. Because mothballing, when you look at it, is the cheapest option if people don't want to support spending that much money. And that's a fact.
Okay, next question. Why were three choices combined into two choices for the resident survey last year? I don't know.
That would be for me. That's your question? Okay, so should have given- So let me explain, what was going on. The question was why it was put into two, should there have been three? So we looked at the history a lot, and one concern was that if we were to put three options on the public opinion poll, there would very likely be no majority, which is where we've found ourselves before. And the reason for doing it this way, which I've said publicly before, and I know some will criticize it, was demolition is a final. You don't come back from demolition. If we demolish the building, it's over. So what we learned from the public opinion poll was that in some people before that public opinion poll thought the majority of residents wanted to demolish it. And there were some prior results that suggested that could be the case. So that was, so that was a concern. So by making it the two options, I remain comfortable with it because I feel like, and basically what we said was we can demolish it now and we had a cost for demolishing, or we can further explore ways to preserve part or all of the building. If there's a way to do that, a project to do that with community support. And so it was a steer, right? So at that point, it's October 2023. We've owned the building for how many years? We will demolish it now if you're done with it, Garden City, or we're going to keep looking for a solution that saves part or all of it. And I'll say there was some part could be the front entrance. It could be the front wall. It could be a third of it. It could be anything, but do you want us to keep at it? And we know how it came out. That was in the presentation, 3961. So that gave us the ability, I think, to spend taxpayer money for professionals to help us find if such a project existed. So that's why we did two back then. I understand there's never a perfect answer. We may have had a different, there was no perfect poll. And I think it moved us forward, and I'm glad we did it. And here we are. That's the answer to why you did it too.
Okay, why did you not wait for the BCI analysis of recreation before making the town hall presentation? So we did get the BCI analysis of the survey, the recreation survey. We did wait for that, as a matter of fact, right? We waited till we got those survey results back from BCI to push into, if you will, this version of our St. Paul's survey. I'm guessing Steve, I'm guessing you're referring to the master plan? Yeah, so the master plan is much bigger than program preferences. The master plan talks about a 5-year plan for recreation and parks, right? How many playgrounds do we need? Do we have the number of, between Grove Street and Hemlock Mill? Do we need more playgrounds? It talks about many, many more issues than just programming. It does talk about facilities as well. But what we thought for the St. Paul's survey, what we really needed back from them, which we got, was the programming preferences, and that was in the recreation survey.
We don't, but I don't think we yet have, and it's just in draft form, so we'll be getting more, but we don't, I think one thing that I'm thinking you might be thinking of, and we're thinking of too, is we did not get, this is how much indoor space we need for programming. And that's something, I don't know why it's not in there yet, but we should get that. And obviously it's hugely relevant. They've studied the whole village. They know what we have. We're now talking about, maintaining or making improvements in 2 buildings. So good question. We have it too. We'll get the answer to that. How much indoor space do we need? We can ask for that. They should know that. I don't know why
Yeah.
it wasn't in. We'll ask for
Judy.
that.
Move on.
We can
Okay,
ask
thank you,
for it.
Steve. Okay,
Steve,
next.
we'll ask for it.
There is. Thank you, Steve. That's what I read. Oh, why did you not provide the mayor and all residents with the documents at the time of your earlier presentation? Will you do that now? What, so I'm not sure. So this presentation, I believe, was posted on the village website. I think. I will double check on that. If not, it will be. I'm not sure. Quick, Steve, quick.
I was at the first.
Yep.
And stuff about what the backup was with trustee Muldoon's numbers. And now we have.
Right here, Steve.
We
now said.
I asked you to come, if you wanted, to my office. I put an email out to you and Steve Gray. Come to my office anytime you want. I'll give you a personal one-on-one, and you never got back to me.
That's
So,
correct.
thank you very much.
That should hold all the residents,
Yeah.
not just Steve Gray.
Okay,
That's my view.
thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Not my job to say what happens in a meeting with you.
Thank you, Steve. Next question.
Next question. This meeting was informative. The potential tax increase outlined by capital markets advisors seemed reasonable. However, how will the village avoid the higher construction cost overruns? I guess this means such as at the senior center. Within 5 years, the village of Garden City spent 3.5 more than the original budget.
I can answer that, Judy. I've said this before. If the residents decide to re-elect me, if I decide to put in for another 2 years, I said it and I mean it. I will make sure, and you can quote me on it and you can hold me to it, okay, that if we have to hire the right firm to do any project that the residents want on St. Paul's, and the estimating process, the detail work, the contingencies will be built in, and we can value engineer that job. Doesn't matter whether it's 125,000 square feet, 500,000 square feet, or 20,000 square feet. Okay, it's the same system in regards to staying in budget. So whatever that bond is approved from, hypothetically, they approved the $75 million for the adaptive reuse or whatever project you guys decide you want. Okay, that's the money we have. That's the money we're going to spend. If we got to scale things back a little bit to stay in budget, we will stay in budget. Okay, realistic timeframes of a project will be set, and they will be held to it. You always give yourself a little lee room and a little wiggle room. Okay, but after that, it's about adult supervision and keeping the feet to the fire of the people that you hire. But the first thing you need to do is hire a great firm who's equipped to do it and have the right people supervising them, period. I will help in representing the village on my own time if you guys decide to re-elect me and see this project to the end, irrespective of the project you want or whatever project it's going to be. Okay, I give my word. I'm doing it again this afternoon. Give up a lot of my time and effort and my wife's and my kids to make this happen for the betterment of Garden City, whatever the residents want.
Okay, next question. 25,000 square feet is what percentage of the total St. Paul's building, or what is the total square foot of the St. Paul's building? 120,000 square feet?
Yeah, so again, I've got this one, and George has talked to me about it, and several other people have. the building right now is projected and has been for a long time, approximately 125,000 square feet. Just like your home, the average home that's a two-story home, so you have a two-story Center Hall Colonial. You have 4 floors technically. A lot of them have 4 floors, right? You have your basement, first floor, second floor, and a walk-up attic. A lot of people have walk-up attics or large attics. That doesn't mean you use the basement all the time and you use the attic. They're either, a lot of them in the old days weren't even finished. They just used the 2 floors. St. Paul's is very similar. People say, oh, we're going to have to finish the whole 125,000 square feet. The chances of that happening are almost zero. The real usable space after now I've been in it so many times and have analyzed it is probably about 75,000 square feet of usable great space that's in there. The rest will be used for mechanical rooms, storage rooms, all kinds of different spaces. You know, basement is great space. You know, I've said this again, this is like the 3rd time I probably said it. Basement was the biggest surprise to me in St. Paul's. The other rooms were not. So again, 25,000 square feet would probably be a third in my view, of the usable quality space, which would be about 75,000 square feet of great space in that building. You could use some of the other rooms for miscellaneous stuff, but you also need storage, you need mechanical rooms, you need electrical rooms, you need all kinds of different spaces for different reasons. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, the October 3rd poll, the October poll had 3 opinions and only 2 choices. Facadism was part of the preservation option and demolition option 2. Why are there only 3 options and not 6, which appeared on the past poll? Why are you limiting choices now? And then a second question was define soft costs. So I think we did answer the first question about.
I'll do the soft costs.
Yeah,
if
and
you
define
want.
soft.
Yeah, so soft costs are a bit. We answered that one already. So let me go to soft costs. Soft costs are a combination. You know, the basics would be architects, engineers, reports, consultants, all kinds of miscellaneous that are involved in a project of that magnitude or any magnitude. Permit fees, if you had permit fees. Again, there's, you know, you'll need lawyers, you'll need consultants, you'll need accountants, you'll need all kinds of different people to do the work that need to be done at St. Paul's to get a project off the ground. That's really, those are the soft costs that cover all those. No,
Okay,
no. And I have right
Next
in the packet here, right here. Show it to you afterwards if you want. Okay, not me that did it. Vacoda spelled out exactly what they felt that the soft costs would be.
okay, we're not getting into a debate.
Yeah, it's not a debate. That's the answer to the
So-
question.
Next questions. Isn't the final square footage for, oh, I see. Isn't the final square footage for the interior flexible? It could be 25,000 square feet, or it could be 30,000 or 40,000, right?
Yes, that's correct. It'll be based on the budget and the programs. The
Correct.
programs, certain programs will cost X, other programs will cost a lot more. So it all depends on what the programs that the village wants. And then when you get accurate plans and accurate quotes back, you'll be able to then value engineer the job and get the most out of the money. And that's how it's done.
Okay, I would like to see an architect create a 3D simulated quote walkthrough of a proposed community center space. Could we arrange this? I would say, yes, we can, but it's premature until we have a better idea of programming, et cetera.
Correct,
But I
yeah.
think that would be very valuable for everybody.
Correct.
And then a bunch of questions on the survey, and then we'll go to Zoom. Okay, survey questions. When will the final version be ready? I would hope within 2 to 3 weeks. Will residents get to see it before it is mailed out? No, we've already posted kind of the draft on the website. The changes now are typos and stuff, so it will be mailed out directly. When will it be sent out? As I said, within 2 to 3 weeks, the final should, and then they say it takes about 2 weeks to get to your door, right? By the time they literally put it in the envelopes and mail it, et cetera. How much time will a household have to fill it out? We're saying right now within 2 to 3 weeks. We hope we have a fairly substantial response rate within that time period. If we need to lengthen that, we will. When will results be completed? BCI estimates they need about a month from that time frame where we close it. Will a survey response be disqualified if it is not filled in completely? No, it will still be included just for the questions that were answered. If a resident just scrolls demo across the form and returns it, will it be counted? Yes, that would kind of be put in the other question, so it will be counted. Conversely, if one just writes in adaptive reuse community center, will that count? Yes, that would count as a response to the question about, do you prefer adaptive reuse? Are there any Zoom questions? Yeah. First question is, what happens if residents vote for a 30-year bond, but we don't have legislature's approval? I think when we went over that before with bond council, we would get that approval before we asked residents to vote on it. So that would not happen.
Yeah.
Okay, how much money will be spent before the bond vote is held? Cost before bonding per Vinnie, group letter and GC News, hiring an architect, engineering, and other necessary firms to design a project for the building. Following this, the project will be put out to bid for qualified contractors under the control of the architects and engineers. Sounds expensive to me. So, I mean, you have to approximate the money, right?
Yeah, I can answer that. So once we get all the information back from the survey, we analyze it all as a board. We have all kinds of discussion with the residents again, and then make a decision if we're going to move forward with a project, and we have the majority of the support for a project. Then the next step would be to go ahead and hire architects, engineers, and begin that phase, because you cannot go to a bond vote without a detailed project and blueprints.
Okay, 10% contingency is too low. It's too low. Does the committee chairman, Mr. Cattell, agree with this? Would he have accepted this low contingency when, no, it's a silly, how accepted this low contingency when he was president of Brooklyn Union Gas?
I cannot speak for Bob Cattell. I know Bob very, very well. He's a class act and a great human being and doing a great job with the St. Paul's Advisory Committee. What I can tell you is if you do your homework and you do it right, 10% is absolutely spot on, and the majority of firms use 10%. This is not like, oh my God, you're the only person who's using 10% in the world. Most of the firms, if you look at the stuff that's gone on over the last 10 years, almost all of them use 10%. Some of them will go to 15 if they're not sure. But you actually do your homework and you're thorough and you have a detailed set of plans. Okay, there will be some surprises. Those surprises always happen after demolition because you're exposing the old structure. That's why you have a 10% contingency. And if a certain area goes over budget, you can value engineer the rest of the project and scale it back a little bit to come back in budget. It's all about diligence, hiring the right firm, and adult supervision.
Okay, we're going to keep moving because there's hardly anyone left. This is very long.
Anonymous, that's kind of weird.
So this question, I'll read the question, but I'm not sure it's appropriate for this conversation.
It's anonymous.
Yeah, all right. So let's go to the next question. The cottages and using the cottages as a revenue stream.
No.
Well, I think that was the question, is why wouldn't you keep them and use them as a revenue stream?
Those cottages are not in very good condition, and you need that space for the overall parking and everything else that needs to go on to accommodate St. Paul's.
Okay, next, Bob Wolf. Please repost the 30-year interest cost sheet for 67.5 and 82.5 and 35 cost. So, I mean, we will post this on the website afterwards,
It's
so
on the website.
we'll have it there. I'm not reading that. Okay, in the previous survey, a lot of residents voted for preservation due to the facade option that was floated as one of the two preservation approaches. Is there now, or was there ever a group within the St. Paul's Committee dedicated to investigating facadism?
We looked at facadism thoroughly in regards to, was it a cost in regards to cost and practicality, and the overwhelming majority of people, I'm talking about the board, agreed that it's not, there's no point in putting an option that's unaffordable. Facadism makes no sense and is unaffordable.
They didn't say.
I assume they were talking about the 38 number. You weren't.
I have no idea. I'm talking about the St. Paul's. We had a lot of conversations with the St. Paul's Advisory Committee in detail about this and looking at every option. And the majority of the board looked at this as well.
Okay. That's the last one? All right, so 2 seconds and then you all can go home. So the next steps are, just so everybody knows, right? The survey, as we said, will be refined or reviewed one last time, a couple little typos here and there, and ready to go within a couple of weeks. We will then give residents 2 to 3 weeks to respond to that. We'll do some marketing around expecting it. It'll be in a yellow envelope, et cetera, et cetera. We will then get that back. I mean, BCI and ETC will get that back and do all the analysis, et cetera. The bottom line is, I would, fingers crossed, hope we would have information to share, review and share with residents, probably, I'm going to say June. I think it'll probably be that long since it's the middle of March already. And, you know, then we'll get it out there with everybody and see where we land. So thank you, those of you who are here especially, for bearing with us. A
know.
long meeting. We appreciate it.
Judy, one thing, can you clarify what the color of that envelope is again?
I think yellow, but they're going to confirm that.
Okay,
They
good.
told me yellow.
And is it going to be regular mail or is it going to be
No, it's bulk mail.
bulk mail?
That's why it takes a little bit to get to people.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep.
Just want to make sure.
But it should be stamped on the outside, you know, St. Paul survey, so
Okay.
people will know.
Great.
Good. Thank you all
Thank you, guys.
for
Thank
your
you.
perseverance.
There you go.